Chapter 121, Neither Side Wins. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A little time passed. Shi Mu had received 2 powerful strikes of a barbarian Xian Tian warrior Zhong Yuan. This incident had made him quite famous. His fame gradually spread across the fortress prefectures. Moreover, he had also slaughtered a number of Hotian totem warriors in the battlefield with his black blade. These 2 incidents had become legends with the passage of time. Many barbarian totem warriors had started to call Shi Mu by the name of Flaming Blade. 6 months later, there was a place in a precarious mountain valley on the border of Rui Prefecture. An intermittent burst of weapons clanging sounds could be heard coming out of the place. They were often accompanied by pitiful screams and shouts. There was an open area deep into the valley. Nearly a dozen lofty and well-built totem warriors were indulged in a heart-shuddering battle with 5 human disciples. They were mercilessly killing and tearing apart the disciples. Shi Mu was one of these disciples. 20 or more corpses were littered about disorderly in the surrounding mountainous regions. Majority of them were human warriors. Most of these corpses were in a torn state. Their mutilated bodies looked as if they had been torn apart by a wild beast. Their severed limbs, blood, and shattered internal organs were scattered all over the valley. The entire valley was filled with an unpleasant and pungent smell of blood. It was so nauseating that it could make anyone puke. Shi Mu and his 10 companions had been attacked by these barbarians on their way back to their stronghold. They had just completed a mission. They had then encountered an ambush while passing through the mountain valley. Only 7 totem warriors had been blocking their way in the beginning. So, the human disciples were confident since they outnumbered the barbarians at the time. Moreover, these disciples were young and ambitious. Therefore, they didn't run away from the battle. However, the situation became lopsided when the 2 sides started to fight. 10 totem warriors had emerged from the surrounding mountain valley, and had joined their group. This had completely turned the table. Then, the human race had started to suffer heavy causalities. A disciple named Xia Hoxian was the leader of the human disciples. He belonged to the Tianyin sect. He realized that the situation had turned adverse for them. But now, they had lost their chance to escape. The human disciples were now outnumbered by the barbarians. Moreover, they had just completed a mission. So, they were already exhausted. Therefore, they quickly fell into an ugly situation. However, they were still fighting desperately by putting their lives at stake. They had killed several totem warriors. But, they had also suffered heavy losses, and had lost many of their warriors. The majority of survivors from both sides were seriously wounded. Shi Mu was also injured. His face was smudged in blood. A 2 feet long wound could be clearly seen on his back. He had also received an injury inside the golden armor he was wearing. Fresh blood was continuously gushing out from his wound. His shirt was soaked in his blood. Moreover, several claw scars could be seen on his thighs and ribs, each one of them was as big as a human's palm. Shi Mu had activated the rejuvenating charm he had received from Miss K in order to stop his bleeding. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived for such a long time. 9 totem warriors were still fighting in the battlefield. 4 of them had surrounded Shi Mu. Shi Mu had been using the golden armor charm to fight with these barbarians. He had risked his life multiple times, and had already succeeded in getting rid of 2 relatively weaker barbarians. Xia Hoxian had also killed several enemies. The situation seemed to have become a little stabilized. However, the attention of all the totem warriors was fixed on Shi Mu since he was famed among the enemies as the Flaming Blade. However, Shi Mu looked calm and composed. His black blade danced around like a gust of wind. It skillfully repelled the attacks of the 4 barbarians. However, he felt a little anxious in his heart. He noticed that Xia Huoxian was in an extremely poor condition. His entire body was covered in blood. It seemed as if he had bathed in blood. But, he was still trying to deal with 2 totem warriors. The other 3 disciples were on the brink of breakdown. One of them had even lost one of his arms. But, he was still fighting with the support of his willpower and conviction. The 4 barbarian men had surrounded Shi Mu from all sides. However, they still feared the black blade in Shi Mu's hand. They looked around and realized that they had the upper hand in the battle. Therefore, they acted sensibly, and didn't rush to kill Shi Mu in a reckless manner. Instead, they switched to a deliberate delaying tactic. Shi Mu was fully aware of the criticality of the situation. He knew that the remaining 3 disciples wouldn't last long under the ruthless attacks of the totem warriors. Even Xia Hoxian was trapped in an extremely precarious situation. Shi Mu moved and evaded another blow. Meanwhile, he looked towards the entrance of the valley. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He could see distant things quite clearly owing to his extraordinary golden pupils. He saw 10 or more black dots at a distance of several hundred feet from the entrance of the valley. They seemed to be getting bigger, as if they were galloping toward them. A golden gleam flashed across his eyes. He realized that these people were totem warriors. Suddenly, 2 heart-wrenching cries resounded in unison. Shi Mu saw that Xia Hoxian had pierced the throat of one of the totem warriors with his spear. The totem warrior had died on the spot. But, Xia Hoxian had himself fallen into the hands of another barbarian. His back was severely slashed by a stone axe. The wound was so deep that his bone could clearly be seen. Fresh blood had started to gush out of his injury. Then, the one-armed disciple was chopped into 2 halves by a totem warrior's axe. A stream of blood flowed out of his severed body, along with his internal organs. The disciple died on the spot. However, he had managed to gather the entirety of his strength right before his death, and had struck hard. His last strike had blinded one of the eyes of his enemy. The one-eyed barbarian's face was smudged in blood. However, he thundered as he raised his axe, and stormed towards Xia Hoxian. Xia Hoxian was severely injured. However, he was still fighting with 2 barbarians. He became even more energetic and serious after he witnessed his companion's death. Suddenly, an idea flashed through Shi Mu's mind. He glanced towards the valley once again, and set a firm resolve. He then held the last armor charm in his hand. His body flashed and dodged a curved dagger from the left side. It was wielded by a tall barbarian. Shi Mu then deliberately exposed himself to a bald barbarian who stood on his right. The bald barbarian's eyes flashed with an ominous glint as he saw Shi Mu. His right palm, similar to a bear's paw, moved and hacked at Shi Mu's right arm. Suddenly, an intense gale plummeted down on Shi Mu's right shoulder with a huge pressure. 2 barbarians stood behind Shi Mu. They were twins. They also started to brandish their mantis-like arms as they noticed Shi Mu. The rapid movement of their arms set off 4 rounds of blade light along with a cold wind. One of the barbarians blocked Shi Mu's left side with his blade light, the other blocked his right side. They had blocked Shi Mu's escape route from both the sides now. Suddenly, a bright golden light sparkled on Shi Mu's left hand. He then patted his chest with his glowing left hand. A faint layer of golden light emerged on his skin, and shrouded his entire body. He turned around to face the twin barbarians. His black blade howled like a dragon amid red flames. It spouted 13 fiery red blade shadows, and these blade shadows rolled out towards the twins. Shi Mu had completely ignored the attack of the bald barbarian in the process. Shua! Shi Mu shouted out loud as the red blade shadows were about to clash with the twins. He had exerted a huge effort, and had instilled his real chi into his blade. The 13 red blade shadows gathered midway, and merged into a streak of a blazing red blade. It was nearly 10 feet long. Shi Mu then pounded his blazing blade light towards one of the twins' head like a bolt of lightning. Clang! A metal clanging sound was heard. The twin barbarian was thunderstruck. He folded his arms in front of his chest in order to ward off the blade. Kaka! His arms were severed from his body with a snapping sound. Puff! Then, a muffled sound was heard. His huge head full of braids was sent flying into the air. However, his headless body remained standing at the same spot. Blood started to gush out of his severed neck like a fountain of blood. This entire process had taken place in a fleeting second. Shi Mu hadn't exhibited a single sloppy movement. But then, a couple of blade shadows and a bear's paw fell heavily on Shi Mu's body. Ping! A few dull thumping sounds resounded. The golden light on Shi Mu's body sparkled brightly. Then, it became dark again. The other twin barbarian lost his mind after he witnessed the death of his brother. He was enraged beyond compare. He swooped down on Shi Mu like a frenzied beast. He didn't even notice that Shi Mu had prepared another move. Shi Mu's left hand had already assumed a strange posture. Suddenly, an air-piercing sound was heard. A cloudy white ball was shot out from Shi Mu's mouth. It had come extremely close to the twin barbarian. So, he couldn't evade it, and was struck in his chest. Bang! The twin barbarian didn't even get a chance to issue a scream. A huge and bloody hole appeared in his chest, it was as big as a millstone. He then slumped down to the ground with a loud sound. Shi Mu then twisted his black blade and shot out several black blade shadows. Those shadows fled from his blade, and repelled the successive attacks of the bald barbarian. His left hand transformed into the stone-breaking fist, and hacked at the blade of another tall barbarian. Shi Mu drew away from the remaining two barbarians after the quick strike. He took a few steps backwards. He then staggered, and regained his balance. Shi Mu's complexion looked pale and exhausted. His physical strength and magic power were on the brink of exhaustion. However, he didn't stop fighting. He held his black blade horizontally before his chest. The surface of his blade glittered once again with a faint red light. It seemed to be prepared to launch another attack. A trace of fear gleamed across the eyes of the tall and the bald barbarians. The two of them exchanged a meaningful look, and moved several steps backwards. Then, they began to move in a circle around Shi Mu from a distance of over 100 feet. Suddenly, a series of pitiful screams filled the surrounding air. Shi Mu was startled. He realized that another two disciples of his team had collapsed in a pool of blood. However, they had poured out last bit of their strengths, and had launched counterattacks against the two totem warriors they had been dealing with. They had killed one of them, the other one was left severely injured. However, the injured totem warrior didn't seem to feel any pain, he completely ignored his chest injury. He then formed a converging attack with the other two barbarians. They were about to hit Xia Hoxian from behind. Xia Hoxian was again in a desperate situation. Suddenly, Shi Mu stepped forward and sprang towards them. He waved his blade in the air, and shot out 13 blade shadows towards the injured totem warrior who was about to launch a converging attack on Xia Hoxian. The tall and the bald barbarians roared in anger as they saw this. They started to chase after Shi Mu hastily. An apprehensive look flashed across Xia Hoxian's eyes as he saw that the three barbarians were about to launch their converging attack on him. The long spear in his hand emitted a black light that traced a few eerie arcs in midair. Then, he leapt towards the one-eyed barbarian. He ignored the other two barbarians behind him, he was now following a collateral damage idea. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The injured barbarian issued a miserable shriek as the two black blade shadows plummeted down on his body. Blood started to gush out of his wounds. Then, his body tumbled down heavily to the ground, it had been cut into 3 pieces. Another blood-curdling screech was heard. Xia Hoxian had pierced the throat of the one-eyed barbarian with his spear. However, he himself was cut into 2 halves from his waist by the shorter barbarian's stone axe. Blood in his internal organs spurted out of his body. Haha! Our leader Tu Yan will be here any moment with more people. Flaming Blade, your death has finally arrived. The bald man was startled and enraged at the same time. He was overwhelmed with happiness as he saw a dozen of figures coming from behind Shi Mu. The other 2 barbarians also looked overjoyed. They had stationed themselves on either side of the bald man, and had blocked the way to the valley's opening. Shi Mu's front side was blocked by the 3 barbarians, and the pursuing team was approaching from behind him. He was now in an extremely dire situation. Shi Mu's complexion darkened. He took out several attacking paper charms, and activated his magic power. Whiz! Whiz! Several whistling sounds were heard as he threw out several paper charms such as the fireball charm, the fiery snake charm, the huge rock charm, the water sword charm and many others towards the bald barbarian. The two fingers of his left hand moved at the same time, and shot out two dazzling silver lights at an incredible speed. The silver lights produced a strange droning sound in the air as they dashed towards the two totem warriors who stood on either side of the bald man. These silver lights were the newer version of the moonlight sea urchin that Shi Mu had recently refined. The shorter barbarian on the left sneered and rotated the axe in his right hand. The rapid movement of his axe formed a white wave. This wave then moved forward to deal with the silver light. The tall barbarian on the right grabbed his curved dagger. It became fuzzy and started to produce several illusory images. It became extremely hard to determine the actual position of his dagger. He also seemed prepared to deal with the approaching silver light. The silver moonlight daggers hadn't yet touched the target. Suddenly, a few purple charm characters lit up on their surface. Then, a layer of purple light shrouded the daggers. The two barbarians were barely able to sense that there was something strange in the air. Two groups of small purple fireballs rose into the air before they could even react. Then, a huge dazzling purple light shrouded the barbarian in the middle. Bang! A loud rumble was heard. The three totem warriors had disappeared without a trace. Two enjoined pits had appeared on the ground where the three of them had stood. The pits were several feet in radius. Shi Mu didn't even stay for a single second after the successful attack. He turned his hand, and stuck another paper charm on his chest. He then transformed into a light breeze, and dashed towards the opening of the valley. Chapter 122, Two Ladies. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away, deep into the heavenly Qing Mountains, situated in the Qing prefecture of the Dachi Kingdom. The mountain was so high that it seemed to be soaring into the sky. There was a palace on the top of the hill. It was surrounded by a number of other buildings. Several human figures could be seen stepping in and out the palace. They seemed to be extremely busy. This palace was the headquarters of the Union. It was formed by the 7 big sects of the 3 kingdoms. There was a majestic palatial hall in the depth of the palace far away from other buildings. It was quite distinct from the other buildings in its periphery. It looked superior to the nearby buildings as it stood out from the crowd. The rear part of the hall was supported against a steep cliff. There were no disciples around to guard the hall. Suddenly, a faint voice burst out from inside the hall. The people inside the hall seemed to be engaged in a dispute over something. Ping! Suddenly, a rattling sound resounded in the hall, as if a cup had shattered into pieces. Then, the back door of the hall opened. The gap in the door was enough to allow a person to pass through it conveniently. 2 beautiful figures flashed and stepped out of the door. They started to advance towards a bamboo grove in the vicinity of the cliff. They didn't turn their heads even once. One of them was clad in white. She had an exquisite figure. There was a pleasant and graceful aura around her. This made her look like a heavenly goddess. She was none other than the demon witch of the Tianyin sect. The other girl was dressed in golden. Her appearance wasn't as charming as the demon witch's. However, her figure was extremely voluptuous. Each of her actions carried a seductive charm. She was Jin Xiaochai of the Black Demon sect. Any matter these old fools discuss, ends up in a squabble. They never arrive at a unanimous decision without wasting much time. To be honest, they aren't concerned about success and failure. It's useless to talk to them. The corners of Jin Xiaohai's mouth curled up as she spoke. Don't expect much from them. The 7 big sects would have been fighting with only words, if the barbarians hadn't launched such a large-scale invasion, the demon witch said with a faint smile. There was a trace of ridicule in her tone. Hehe, you're right. We should rather be thankful to these barbarian people. Now, we sisters can see each other frequently. Jin Xiaochai turned her head and looked at the demon witch. Then, she spoke with a loving and innocent expression on her face. You aren't a little girl anymore. So, don't say such words. The barbarians' invasion isn't a trivial matter. We can't afford to be careless. Otherwise, the several hundred years of the history of our 7 big sects will be crushed by the barbarians. The demon witch wrinkled her delicate eyebrows as she spoke in a chiding tone. They're nothing but a bunch of barbarians, that's all. They aren't as dangerous as you think. Jin Xiaochai curled her lips and replied in a tone of disapproval. They continued to discuss the matter until they arrived in the bamboo forest. The green bamboos were swaying back and forth in the soft breeze. This had added a nonchalant and secluded aura to the forest. It served as a sharp contrast against the incomparable silhouettes of the 2 beautiful ladies. I've recently heard that Shang Heng's corpse was found in the Yuyang Mountains of the Fu Prefecture. He was known by the name of Cold Sword. Are you responsible for this? Jin Xiaochai asked. He was a sly and treacherous man. I don't understand why Miss Yun was so easily swindled by his flattering words. He had been residing in the Fu Prefecture by concealing his identity. Fortunately, the barbarians' invasion drove him out of his hideout. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to track him down. A cold look flashed in the demon witch's eyes. She then replied in a non-committal tone. Humph! Men are unfaithful heartbreakers. He didn't receive a fair punishment. You let him off very easily. He should have been chopped into pieces. Then, his soul should have been imprisoned in my black snake jar, so that he could be tortured by the painful and poisonous bites for eternity. It's regrettable that Miss Yun died for such a man. There was a gloomy expression on Jin Xiaohai's pretty face as she spoke in an angry tone. The demon witch's eyes flashed as she heard these words. Suddenly, a pair of warm eyes appeared in her thoughts. They had a trace of stubbornness to them. This memory filled her heart with a sudden realization. Jin Xiaochai didn't notice the change in the demon witch's expression. She continued, I've heard that the only disciple of Miss Yun is still fighting the barbarians on the battlefront. I've seen her once. She's called Miss Xian. She seems to share similar characteristics with her master Miss Yun. Why don't you transfer her to a safer place? I tried once. I called her back to our sect. But, she seems to be even more stubborn than Lan Yun. She insisted on strengthening herself by going through life and death situations, the demon witch replied helplessly. Jin Xiaochai let out a long sigh. However, it's not bad for her. She may not progress further if she doesn't experience the hardships of life and death situations. Several young disciples of the 7 big sects have made a remarkable progress during these past 2 years owing to the fights against the barbarian race. A number of new promising characters have also appeared from various sects, the demon witch said. If you are saying this, then there should be some reason behind it. Anyways, it's said that you seem to be more warm-hearted than before, when it comes to these trivial matters. I haven't seen you care about the situation of these young disciples before. Jin Xiaochai narrowed her eyes and said. My master was injured by Mang Shang. She hasn't recovered yet. So, I must share some part of her responsibilities, the demon witch replied in an indifferent tone. Oh! If you say so, Miss Xuet. I know that you have a very keen eye for talent. So, I'm really curious to know which disciples in the 7 sects have the potential to attract your attention. Just tell me a couple of names, Jin Xiaochai asked curiously. Miss Xian participated in a difficult mission on the battlefront around 6 months ago. She had to mount a sneak attack on one of the strongholds of the barbarian race along with her teammates. I was worried about her. So, I followed her team. I then noticed a disciple of your sect. His name was Shi Mu. He was a strong and courageous guy. Moreover, his wisdom was really admirable. The demon witch didn't reply for a while. She then said slowly. Shi Mu? It seems like I've heard this name before. What does he look like? Jin Xiaochai asked in a curious manner. He's a tall guy with bronze skin, and decent facial features. He's proficient in using a blade. Oh! By the way, he's also a charm magician. The demon witch's elegant eyebrows plunged into a frown as she spoke the words charm magician. Oh! So, it's really him. I remember him now. He had made a good impression on me as well. Speaking of which, he should thank me for bringing him to our black demon sect. Miss Xuet, you seem to care a lot about this disciple Shi Mu. You don't usually remember the appearance of an ordinary disciple. Jin Xiaochai thought for a while. She then smiled and clapped her hands. But then, her beautiful eyebrows creased as a thought crossed her mind. Her eyes gleamed with a suspicious look as she looked at the demon witch. I just think that he has a great potential. Moreover, he belongs to your sect. So, I thought that I should remind you to pay attention to him. The demon witch didn't pay attention to her suspicious words. She replied in the same indifferent tone. Suddenly, Jin Xiaohai's silhouette flashed as she appeared in front of the demon witch. Miss Xuet, you had promised me in our childhood that the two of us would stay together forever. Also, that you would never like any other person. Don't you remember your words? Jin Xiaochai threw a fervent look at the demon witch. She then stretched out her hands, and touched the white and flawless face of the demon witch. It was a joke which I told you as a kid. Don't take it so seriously. I don't want to hear you mention it ever again. I've some business to take care of. So, I'll take my leave now. The demon witch drew one step backwards, and gently shunned Jin Xiaohai's hand. Her facial expression looked cold. She then floated in the air and departed. Jin Xiaochai continued to gaze at the receding figure of the demon witch for a while. Then, she stamped her foot furiously. A menacing look flashed across her eyes. Her facial expression returned to its normal state after a while. She looked calm. There wasn't a slightest trace of anger on her face. Instead, a broad smile flashed across her pretty face. She then began to walk towards the opposite direction. Shi Mu had been choosing remote paths for the past 3 days. He had managed to safely return to a hidden cave located in the middle of a hill. This place was a lot bigger than the underground mine he had stayed in before. Moreover, it was one of the most important strongholds of the Union in the Rui Prefecture. More than 100 disciples of 7 big sects had been assigned to this stronghold. It was headed by an accomplished Houtian warrior. Shi Mu's identity as the Flaming Blade had greatly contributed to his special identity as a charm magician. It had earned him quite a bit of fame. Therefore, almost all the disciples of this stronghold knew him. Several disciples noticed that his entire body was covered in wounds as he returned to the stronghold. All of them seemed startled. But, none of them dig into the details as they knew their limits. Shi Mu had been made a part of a team of 20 disciples when he had set out on the mission. But, only Shi Mu had returned, that too, covered in severe wounds. So, everything was self-explanatory. So, this is what happened. A loud and clear voice burst out from a stone room situated deep into the cave. There was a trace of shock and anger in that voice. The voice belonged to a person named Jin Chen. He looked like a 30-year-old youth. He was tall and well-built, and had a muscular body. He looked more like a barbarian because of his huge build and height. Shi Mu was quite tall. But, Jin Chen was even taller than him, almost a person's head taller in size. I'll certainly report this matter to the Union. By the way, brother, she did a wonderful job by bringing back such important information to us. You should get 10 extra feat points apart from the basic rewards for this great contribution. You don't have to go out for the next few days. You should take proper rest to heal your wounds. Shi Mu obeyed. He received the identity token from him, and went to his room. A moment later, Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his bed. The upper part of his body was bare. His wounds weren't bleeding anymore. However, lots of scars and bruises could be seen all over his skin. It was a breathtaking sight. He picked up a piece of soft and shining golden armor from the pile of his blood-stained clothes. A trace of sorrow flashed through his eyes as he looked at the armor. He had fought over 100 battles against the barbarians during the past 2 years. He had always relied on this armor. He had been really lucky since this armor had protected him and sustained all kinds of attacks. Otherwise, he would have received several serious wounds. However, the armor was now seriously damaged. This battle was one of the fiercest battles he had gone through so far. However, it wasn't as dangerous as the battle he had fought with the Xiantian warrior Zhong Yuan a few months ago, when he and his team members had been assigned to infiltrate the barbarians' granary stronghold. His armor had been badly damaged because of the converging attack of the 3 barbarians. It was too tattered to be of any use. Shi Mu forced a smile and put the golden armor aside. He then fished out a bottle of green ointment. He started to apply the ointment on his wounds. He felt a refreshing feeling that began to cool his wounds. This ointment was given to him by Miss K. She had given him this bottle on the day she had been transferred to another stronghold by the order of her sect. It was quite effective at healing the blade wounds. However, it couldn't be compared with K's wood-style healing technique. He couldn't help but think of the days when the two of them had fought side by side. She wouldn't have left his wounds unattended like this if she was here. Then, he wouldn't have to depend on this ointment to treat his wounds. Shi Mu sighed and shook his head. Then, he started to operate the real qi within his body. He wanted to heal his injuries using his real qi in combination with the ointment. His blood seemed to have strengthened a little after he had consumed the black blood and soul pill that was given to him by the demon witch. This pill had also helped him with his practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. In addition, his self-healing capabilities had also improved remarkably. His injuries got 70–80% restored within a span of 4–5 days owing to his frightening restoration strength. However, he hadn't sat idle during this period. He had spent most of his time in refining another set of low-grade magic charms. He had used most of his magic charms during the ambush he had encountered a few days ago. He also hadn't forgotten about the especially made moonlight sea urchin daggers. He had requested Zhao Ping to make a few more daggers for him. But, he hadn't got an opportunity to return to his sect to collect them due to the intensity of the war's situation. Chapter 123, A Transfer Order. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu was occupied with the drawing of magic charms in his room when he heard a knock on his door. He raised his eyebrows, and stood up to open the door. He was surprised to see the person standing outside. He had expected to see a disciple with a request for refining magic charms. However, he saw a tall and sturdy man standing at his door. It was none other than Jin Chen. How did Brother Jin get the time to visit his younger brother? Shi Mu asked in a suspicious tone. Then, he led him inside his room. Jin Chen looked around, and fixed his gaze on the stone table. There was a stack of charm papers, a bottle of ink, a magic brush and other stuff lying on the table in a disorderly manner. A few finished magic charms were also kept on the table. Brother Shi is extremely hard-working. You're working even while recuperating from wounds. You should take rest, Jin Chen smiled. He didn't mention the reason behind his visit. Senior, you're mocking me. I'm just recuperating, it's really boring. So, I chose to refine a few magic charms to kill time, Shi Mu replied with a faint smile. Jin Chen picked up some paper charms, and started to observe them. Brother Shi, your drawing technique is extremely smooth. Moreover, your magic charms seem to be full of spirit power. Going by your success ratio, it really seems that you've got the knack for making paper charms. I've seen many charm magicians of the spirit rank. But, none of them can achieve a success rate such as yours. Unfortunately, our stronghold can't enjoy your presence any longer, Jin Chen sighed and spoke in a tone filled with regret. What does Brother Jin mean? Shi Mu's expression changed. Hee. I've just received a transfer order from the Union. They want you to be transferred to the Northeast Stronghold. I had nothing to do today. So, I thought to deliver this news to you in person, Jin Chen chuckled softly. He then took out a jade slip from his shirt and passed it over to Shi Mu. Shi Mu was startled. He received the jade slip, and examined it with his spirit power. It was a transfer order, duly signed by the Union. They wanted him to rush to a secret stronghold in the Xianling Mountains. He had to report there within 10 days. The map of that place was attached to the slip. The surrounding terrain of the stronghold was also marked on it. Shi Mu felt delighted as he saw the map. The indicated stronghold seemed to be quite far from the battlefront according to the map. So, it was supposed to be relatively safer than his present stronghold. However, the jade slip didn't specify any reason for Shi Mu's sudden transfer. But, it was never a bad thing to be transferred to the rear area. Sorry for giving you so much trouble, Senior Jin. I'll comply with the Union's order, and set out within 2 days. Shi Mu put away the jade slip. Then, he cupped his hands against his chest and said respectfully. May I ask Brother Shi for a little favor before he leaves? Jin Chen hesitated for a while. He then asked in an embarrassed tone. Brother Jin, if you've something to say, then please feel free to say it. I'll do everything I can to help you, Shi Mu replied without thinking even once. Good. First of all, I would like to express a genuine gratitude to you on behalf of all disciples of this stronghold. Brother Shi can also see that the war at the front is getting intense with each passing day. So, it requires a huge supply of magic charms. I hope Brother Shi can refine some magic charms for us before he leaves. To be honest, I wanted to put forward this matter after your full recovery. But now, that this order has been issued, it'll be too late if I don't ask you now. I've already brought the detailed list of the magic charms along with the materials needed to refine them. The feat points for this task will be 50% more than usual. Jin Chen clasped his hands in obeisance as he said. Then, he took out another jade slip from his bosom, and placed it on the table. He also placed a pile of magic papers along with several spirit stones. You can rest assured, Brother Jin. I'll finish this task on time, Shi Mu smiled and spoke in a confident manner. Shi Mu held a favorable impression of Jin Chen in his heart. Jin Chen was a calm and sensible leader of the stronghold. He had always been fair to his fellow disciples. Moreover, this task could earn Shi Mu extra feat points. He would also get a good opportunity to hone his refining skills. So, he couldn't turn down this offer. Jin Chen felt exhilarated as he heard Shi Mu's positive reply. He thanked him profusely, and then bid his farewell. After 10 days, deep in the Xianling Mountains, a young man stood at the foot of a several thousand feet high mountain peak. The youth wore a short black jacket. He was a tall youth, and had a well-built stature. He stood on top of a huge stone. He was observing the surrounding area. His eyebrows were slightly creased. It was none other than Shi Mu. He had found this place by following the map he had received with the jade slip. He had been wandering around this area for a while. But, no one had showed up to receive him. The entrance to the stronghold must have been concealed by a magic formula. They might be expecting me to find it myself, Shi Mu was speechless. He had only a superficial knowledge of the formula magic. Therefore, it wasn't easy for him to see through an illusionary formula set up by someone else. However, he had his own ways. He jumped down from the huge stone. His pupils narrowed and turned golden. He then focused his eyes on the ground, and observed it closely. He squatted down near a patch of grass after a while. A blurred footprint could be seen on the ground. The footprint was either too old or had been washed away by the rain. This had made it invisible to ordinary eyes. Shi Mu's lips creased into a smile. The footprint was quite shallow. But, it couldn't escape his extraordinary eyesight. The footprint looked like a clear mark left by a huge elephant in Shi Mu's eyes. Shi Mu stood up, and started to walk in the direction of the footprints. Many other human traces also appeared as he continued to walk. Most of the traces were left on either some rocks or solid ground. So, they were very shallow, and couldn't be recognized easily. But, Shi Mu had found the right direction. The marks grew clearer as he continued to advance forward. Moreover, all the traces were leading him in the same direction. This boosted his confidence. He stood in front of a mountain wall a moment later. He noticed that all traces had converged and vanished there. His pupils became golden once again. He examined the stone wall closely. Then, he gently rested his hand on the surface of the wall. Suddenly, his hand sank into the stone. "That's it," Shi Mu nodded and retracted his arm. Suddenly, a hole split open on the stone wall with a flash of a white light. A green-robed man stood at the entrance right in front of him. "You must be Shi Mu of the Black Demon Sect. Welcome to the Rat's Nest. I'm Qing Feng, a disciple of the Tianyin sect." The man smiled and looked at Shi Mu from head to toe. Then, he introduced himself. "Yes. I'm Shi Mu. Thank you for welcoming me, Brother Qing." Shi Mu took out the identity token of the Union and the jade slip that contained the transfer order. "Come in." Qing Feng didn't stretch out his hand to receive the token and the transfer order. Instead, he stepped aside, and invited Shi Mu inside. Shi Mu withdrew his hand without even batting an eye. Then, he advanced forward and stepped in. Suddenly, he felt a flash of light in front of his eyes. Then, he found himself standing in front of a spacious passageway. It led to an underground place. The green-robed man stood beside him. Shi Mu focused his eyes, but couldn't see anything. A pitch-black darkness was spread throughout the passageway. Shi Mu couldn't figure out the length of the passageway owing to the darkness. Brother Shi could find this place all by himself. It's very unusual. You indeed deserve Elder Jin's recommendation. Qing Feng chuckled as he said. Recommendation? Elder Jin. Shi Mu was taken aback, so much so that his feet froze. Qing Feng also stopped walking as he noticed Shi Mu's startled expression. So, he asked in a puzzled tone, "What's wrong? Can it be that Brother Shi doesn't know anything about this place?" "That's right. I just received the Union's transfer order, asking me to report to this stronghold within 10 days. I don't have any idea what this place is all about," Shi Mu replied with honesty. "It seems that Brother Shi really doesn't know anything. Well, I'll explain it to you. This isn't an ordinary stronghold. It was especially formed to draw magic charms for the Union." Qing Feng looked at Shi Mu with a surprised look on his face. He pondered for a while, and then said, "A stronghold for drawing magic charms." Shi Mu was dumbstruck. The battles have become extremely intense these days. So, the Union has temporarily formed this place in order to cope up with the huge demand for low-grade charms on the battlefront. The Union has gathered the elite charm magicians of various sects to fulfill this goal. Brother Shi's charm-making skills seem to have left a profound impression on some high-level elders. In addition, Elder Jin Xiaochai of your sect had strongly recommended you to the Union. So, you've been sent here, Qing Feng continued to lead him as he explained. Shi Mu's eyebrows wrinkled as he heard these words. He had met Jin Xiaochai only once at the time of joining the sect. He had never seen her after that. It baffled him to think that a Xian Tian warrior had paid so much attention to him. He didn't know whether it was a blessing or a misfortune. A few disturbing thoughts swarmed up in his mind. But, he continued to follow Qing Feng in silence. They continued to walk for some time. Then, they arrived at the end of the passageway. There was a stone door in front of them. Qing Feng flipped his hand, and took out a white jade piece. It was as big as a human palm. A few charm characters were carved on it. He shook it gently. Then, a beam of white light shot out and sank into the stone door. Caw. The two doors opened, and revealed what was inside. A huge hall appeared in front of their eyes. It was almost 100 feet in radius. More than 100 people were walking back and forth inside the hall. Dazzling lights could often be seen soaring towards the sky. A number of stove-like red furnaces were set up in the hall. They were spouting raging flames in a continuous manner. 2 or 3 people stood beside each of the furnaces. They were inserting various kinds of ores, animal furs, bones and other materials into the burning stoves from time to time. Shi Mu was familiar with these sort of stoves. These red furnaces weren't used for refining pills, but for making charm papers. A burly man stood beside one of the burning furnaces. He occasionally poured a little amount of thick green liquid into a square mold that was kept beside the stove. The liquid would quickly cool down. Then, it would condense into a piece of green charm paper. It was then carefully picked up, and put away by another fellow who stood nearby. There were more than 40 similar stoves in the hall. They were being used for making various kinds of charm papers. Keep moving. Qing Feng waited for a moment to allow Shi Mu to observe. He then started to advance towards the other side of the hall. The workers who stood beside the stove seemed respectful towards Qing Feng. They bowed to him as they saw him, and cast a curious look towards Shi Mu. However, Qing Feng didn't pay attention to these people. He led Shi Mu out of the hall. Then, they entered another long passageway. A few stone doors could be seen along the passageway, they were tightly closed. Shi Mu couldn't understand the purpose of the closed doors. They arrived before another huge stone door after a while. The hall that you just saw was formed only for the workers. They've been assigned here to make charm papers. But, this place is especially made for making magic charms. Several elite charm magicians of various sects work in this hall. You're new here. So, you can take help from others, whenever you need, Qing Feng said. He then pulled out the white jade once again. A beam of white light fled from the jade, and submerged into the stone door. The door started to open slowly. There was another huge hall on the other side of the door. It had a circular arc-shaped ceiling. Several white chandeliers were hung at every few feet. The entire hall was illuminated by them. There were several stone desks in the hall. They were piled up with various kinds of charm papers, magic brushes, magic ink, and other materials. There were 20 or 30 of such stone tables. Almost all of them were occupied by at least one disciple. Some of the disciples looked fully absorbed in drawing magic charms, some others were discussing something in low voices. There were also a few independent rooms around the hall. All of them were closed, except for the one nearest to the exit. Moreover, there was a huge white jade wall on the other side of the hall. Several rows of characters were inscribed on its surface. They seemed to be the missions assigned to these disciples. Most of the people noticed the two individuals who had just arrived. But, they just glanced at them. Only a couple of people nodded to Qing Feng, they then resumed their work. Chapter 124, Privilege. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Brother Qing, the task that Master Fang Shang assigned 3 days ago is 60% complete. But, Brother Tong of the Tianyin sect isn't in a good condition. He's constantly making mistakes while making the paper charms. I'm afraid he won't be able to complete the task in time. Can you do something about this? A youth adorned in the blue robe of the Black Turtle sect walked over to Qing Feng and said. Qing Feng muttered something to himself. He then nodded and said, "Well, we'll take care of this matter." Suddenly, he smiled and pointed towards Shi Mu. "This is Brother Shi Mu. He belongs to the Black Demon sect. He was called to join us, so that everyone's pressure can be eased a little." The blue-robe youth stared blankly for a moment. He then turned his head to look at Shi Mu. Suddenly, his complexion changed. "Shi Mu, is it you?" The blue-robed youth seemed surprised. "Feng Li, is it you?" Shi Mu also seemed startled. The youth in the blue robe was Feng Li. Shi Mu knew him since he was the member of the Black Fox gang in Feng City. He looked 10 years younger than the last time Shi Mu saw him. What's the matter? Do you know each other? Qing Feng was surprised. Yes, brother Shi and I belong to the same village. We've faced many situations together. A confused look flashed across Feng Li's face as he replied. Oh. It's like that. You take your leave now. I'll first take Shi Mu to Master Fang Shang. You'll have plenty of time to talk about old days later on, Qing Feng spoke without asking any further questions. Shi Mu felt strange in his heart even though there was a smile on his face. The confused expression on Feng Li's face hadn't escaped Shi Mu's eyes even though it had quickly disappeared. Feng Li nodded in agreement. He then nodded to Shi Mu and walked away. Come with me, Qing Feng addressed Shi Mu. Then, they arrived at a thin pavement. Shi Mu looked back to take a glance at the departing figure of Feng Li. Then, he started to follow Qing Feng. We make paper charms, as per the orders of the Union, unlike the front-line disciples who have to risk their lives in the war. Ones who make paper charms are rewarded with high feat points. But, the task here isn't simple. You might have noticed that everyone here is exceptionally busy. This is because the tasks are assigned with strict deadlines. People lose the privilege to stay here if they take longer than what's expected. They're then transferred to the front strongholds, and then they have to continue carrying out those dangerous missions, Qing Feng warned Shi Mu as they continued to walk on the pavement. Senior brother, thanks a lot for reminding me. Unexpectedly, Shi Mu didn't feel anxious. However, he nodded as he spoke. You don't need to worry, brother Shi. The number of charm masters in this stronghold is relatively low. Various kind of magic charms fall short of demand. Occasionally, there isn't time to meet all the demands. So, we also lend a helping hand, as long as one doesn't make a very big mistake, Qing Feng spoke in a strict tone. But then, he comforted Shi Mu with a smile. They reached at the end of the hall after a while. Qing Feng knocked on the door, and asked for permission to enter. He then pushed open the door and walked inside. The hall looked like a living room. The decoration was plain and simple. Only a few tables and chairs were kept inside the hall. There was a tall table in the middle of the room. It was occupied by a master in a light green robe. He was an old man with grey hair. Another tall table was placed next to the old man. A golden-robed maiden sat on that table. She looked a little indolent. She had a fresh and pure face. Her figure was exceptionally enchanting. Her breasts were erect like two peaks of a mountain. She looked soul-stirring. The woman had an alluring aura around her body. Moreover, she had a flirtatious expression on her face. This woman was Jin Xiaochai. Shi Mu was startled as he saw Jin Xiaochai sitting on the high table. Qing Feng had figured out the identity of this woman. But, he hadn't expected her to be present there. Jin Xiaochai's eyes flashed as she saw Shi Mu enter the hall. She slowly straightened her body to sit up. A green light flashed through her pupils as she threw an indistinct gaze towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu's complexion changed. He got goosebumps. He felt as if he was being observed by a poisonous snake. Suddenly, his heart began to thump quickly. However, that strange feeling disappeared within a quarter of a second, as if it was just an illusion. Shi Mu shot a glance at Jin Xiaochai. He felt mild emotions in his heart as he saw this goddess staring at him. Her wonderful eyes didn't reveal even the slightest bit of indifference. A hint of doubt flashed through Shi Mu's eyes. He couldn't dare to look at her. So, he moved his eyes away. He then looked at the old man with grey hair. He felt a slight shiver in his heart. The old man had a deep and profound aura around his body. Shi Mu was astonished as he had never sensed this kind of an aura before. Even the Xian Tian warrior whom Shi Mu had come across was nowhere near him. The magician Master Xie of the Black Demon sect had a similar kind of aura. Shi Mu regained his vision as he glanced at him. He lowered his head. This man was certainly the senior master Fang Shang that Qing Feng had talked about. He seemed to be a star-grade magician in this place. Master Fang sang, the black demon sex Shi Mu is here. Qing Feng was extremely respectful towards this man. He bowed to him as a part of the ritual. Shi Mu also followed the ritual and bowed. No need to be overly polite. Get up, the grey-haired man spoke in a dull tone. The two men stood up as they heard the old man's words. The grey-haired man looked at Shi Mu carefully. He nodded and turned his head towards Jin Xiaochai. It seems that this is the person whom Sister Jin had recommended. Good. His magic powers are pure and profound. There shouldn't be any problem if his ability of making paper charms is really as outstanding as the rumors claim. Hee. Senior brother Fang is overpraising me. I've interacted with this disciple before, and at some point, I started to feel that he had the ability to stand out from other disciples. I recently heard that he had learned to make paper charms. So, I recommended him, so that he can come here and hone his skills. Jin Xiaochai pursed up her lips and spoke with a smile. Shi Mu was surprised to hear these words. Qing Feng also seemed astonished to hear this. Since nobody has any problem. Qing Feng, you lead young Master Shi to receive the jade token, so that he can come in and go out of the stronghold freely. Then, organize a stone chamber for him. After that, young Master Shi can start working here, the grey-haired man nodded and said. He didn't speak to Jin Xiaochai again. Qing Feng's complexion changed. He looked at Shi Mu with surprise. The corners of Qing Feng's mouth moved as he complied with the order. Young Master Shi, you'll be able to enhance your ability of making paper charms if you work hard here. Then someday, I'll surely request the sect to promote you to become an inner disciple. Jin Xiaochai spoke to Shi Mu in a pleasant tone. Numerous thoughts crossed Shi Mu's mind as he replied with gratitude, yes. Thank you for guiding me, elder sister Jin. This disciple wouldn't disappoint you. Well, you shall take your leave now, the old grey-haired man waved his hand and said. Shi Mu bowed to both of them. He then turned around and walked out of the room. There were signs of restlessness in Shi Mu's eyes. He felt as if he was carrying a burden on his shoulders. He felt uneasy. He started to walk faster and exited the hall. The feeling of unease gradually faded away. Shi Mu finally heaved a sigh of relief. He then turned around and glanced at the tightly shut stone gate. His eyes flashed a few times. His mind was filled with a series of doubts. But, he continued to follow Qing Feng. Brother Shi, Master Fang Shang considers you to be an important person. He has provided you with a separate stone room, Qing Feng said in an envious tone. Oh! Are independent rooms quite scarce? Shi Mu asked in a puzzled tone. Of course. You must have seen just now. All the charm masters make the paper charms in the hall. But, it's vulnerable to the outside world. The separate stone chambers can keep you hidden from any damages. Moreover, independent chambers are fully equipped. Master Feng has personally cast a reincarnation spell in each of the independent chambers, in order to speed up the restoration of the magic powers. It has various kinds of benefits to tranquil one's mind. There are only 4 independent chambers in the entire stronghold. Previously, Master Fang Shang and other 3 charm magicians of spirit grade used to occupy these strongholds. But, a charm magician of Tianyin sect who occupied one of these chambers got transferred a fortnight ago. Therefore, his room is vacant, Qing Feng said. Shi Mu nodded. He didn't look happy. Brother Shi, it's a status symbol to occupy an independent chamber in this stronghold. You've been given one, even though you've just arrived. Other people may not accept this. You must be extremely careful, Qing Feng warned Shi Mu. Thanks a lot, Brother Qing, Shi Mu cupped his hands across his chest and thanked him. Qing Feng smiled. He didn't say anything else, and continued to walk. Meanwhile, in the living room. Sister Jin, I've done what you requested. Don't forget the thing that you promised. The grey-haired man shook his head and said, he looked helpless. You don't need to worry. Since I, your younger sister, have made a promise, I'll naturally keep it. Jin Xiaochai stood up and smiled mischievously. She then started to walk. Good. By the way, what's so special in this Shi Mu, that made you show up personally? He didn't seem to be suitable for your temperament. The grey-haired old man glanced at Jin Xiaochai and asked. Do you really want to know? Jin Xiaochai's eyes flashed. She then turned around and smirked. Forget it. I'm not interested in your personal matters and eccentric habits. But, I warn you to leave the idea of hurting Miss K. The grey-haired man's eyebrows trembled as he looked at Jin Xiaochai's smiling face. He changed the topic of discussion and said respectfully. He. I was only trying to find her to ask her about a matter the other day, that's all. Is there anything else that makes you nervous? Jin Xiaochai smiled sweetly. Suddenly, her entire body became extremely enchanting. That girl has 5 degree of wood attribute element induction ability. Such a talented disciple is born once in centuries. Don't blame me, your master, for teaching you a lesson if you try to harm her, the grey-haired old man snorted and replied. Jin Xiaochai chuckled. She didn't seem to have the slightest regard for the old man's words. Suddenly, some faint voices burst out of the hall. Master Feng Shang wrinkled his big white eyebrows. He got up and started to walk towards the source of the noise. Jin Xiaochai's eyes moved. It seemed as if she had been expecting something. She smiled and followed the old man with light footsteps. They arrived in the hall where the noise was coming from. It was the hall where paper charms were made. More than 20 charm masters were standing in a circle. They seemed to be having a discussion over something. Everyone noticed Master Feng Shang and Jin Xiaochai approach. All of them stepped aside to make way for them. Most of the discussions ended at once. Only one person hadn't seen them coming. He was still shouting in an outrageous manner. In short, how can you allocate an independent stone room to a person who has just arrived? I can't approve a new person getting an independent chamber. The others can't accept this either. Shi Mu stood straight opposite to him. He was listening to the man's words in a calm manner. His face was expressionless even though the man's saliva was sprayed on his face. Chapter 125, Dispute over the Charm Room. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The purple-robed bald youth was still making a ruckus when he noticed that the echoes of the surrounding disciples had died down. He turned around to find Master Feng Shang and Jin Xiaochai standing in front of him. He immediately closed his mouth, but he still looked resentful. What's the matter? It seems that you've finished your assignment, as you've so much free time to waste in an unnecessary quarrel, Master Feng Shang spoke in a dignified tone. Master Feng Shang, the matter is, Qing Feng looked helpless. He quickly arrived at Master Feng Shang's side, and recounted the whole matter in a low voice. It turned out that Shi Mu was the reason behind this uproar. He had started to receive preferential treatment right after he had set his foot in the stronghold. He had been assigned to an independent stone room. This had triggered a feeling of resentment and dissatisfaction among all the other charm magicians. The bald man's reaction was the most intense. He had taken the lead to cause this commotion. Master Feng Shang turned around and shot a glance at Jin Xiaochai. But, Jin Xiaochai had a glittering smile on her face. She seemed unconcerned about the matter. Qiu Ming, it seems that you have an objection to my decision. Do you think that Shi Mu doesn't have the qualifications to occupy an independent room? Master Feng Shang's complexion sank as he said. This disciple will never dare to oppose you. But, Brother Shi has just joined our stronghold. He hasn't even made any contribution. But, he's still getting the best treatment. The other fellow disciples won't say anything. But, they're also dissatisfied, the bald youth bowed and replied in a respectful tone. Qiu Ming was a tall youth with a thin stature. He was slightly taller than Shi Mu. He was a mediocre-looking person with no attractive features. He shot a sidelong glance at Shi Mu as he spoke. There was a hint of contempt in his eyes. He was attired in an elaborate purple gown with embroidered work. It was the uniform of the Yinfu Palace. This sect was situated in the Great Huang country. The Yinfu Palace wasn't as formidable as the 7 big sects. However, it was pretty famous for its charm magic and formula magic. Therefore, it claimed to be a leading sect in charm magic, and considered itself far superior to the 7 big sects in this regard. Most of the disciples of this sect were proficient charm magicians. More than 30% of the total disciples of this stronghold belonged to the Yinfu Palace. Master Feng Shang looked at the surrounding disciples. The disciples lowered their heads. But, a reluctant look could be seen on their gloomy faces. It seemed that Shi Mu receiving an independent room right after he entered the stronghold had broken some kind of a taboo. This made Master Feng Shang to wrinkle his eyebrows. Suddenly, the bald youth looked at Master Feng Shang and said, "Master, I want to make a suggestion. I don't know whether I should say it or not." "It's okay. Feel free to share your views," Master Feng Shang said with an expressionless face. The Union's missions have become increasingly intense these days. So, it would be inappropriate to keep the independent room idle. So, I think that it would be reasonable to let the best charm magician take the room. We'll never dare to say anything again if Brother Shi can convince us. The bald youth felt confident after he had received Master Feng Shang's permission. He explained his views in a self-assured manner. Master Feng Shang's eyebrows gathered in a frown. There was a thoughtful expression on his face. He could easily press down this matter by the virtue of his authority. However, it would be unfair to the other disciples. This action would bitterly disappoint them. Master Feng Shang glanced at Jin Xiaochai with pleading eyes. But, she only flashed a smile as if she couldn't see through his meaningful glance. "You're the most proficient charm magician among all the magician apprentices of this stronghold. So, I can allow a competition between you and Shi Mu. The independent room will be allotted to the winner." Master Feng Shang's heart sank. He secretly cursed Jin Xiaochai in his heart, sly little fox. He then announced his decision in a non-committal tone. The bald youth beamed with exultation as he heard these words. He immediately expressed his gratitude to the master. Then, he shot a provocative look at Shi Mu and spoke in a haughty manner, "Brother Shi, let's have a competition of drawing paper charms." "Well, since senior brother wants to compete with me, I'll surely accompany him till the end," Shi Mu smiled and replied without any hesitation. "Then, let's fix the time limit of an hour. We'll have to refine as many body-lifting charms as possible in this time period. The winner will be the one who draws more number of charms." "What do you say?" the bald youth said bluntly. The surrounding disciples broke into heated discussions in low voices. Most of them looked towards Shi Mu as they waited for his response. These people were well aware of this situation. Chu Ming was a renowned magician of wind style. Moreover, he had gained expertise in drawing the body-lifting charms even though they were extremely difficult to make. Feng Li also stood in the crowd. He shook his head as he looked at Shi Mu. "Well, it's settled then." Shi Mu acted as if he hadn't noticed Feng Li's gesture. He smiled and looked at the bald youth. Then, he replied with a nod. The surrounding disciples burst into whispers as they heard Shi Mu's reply. Many people revealed a delightful look on their faces, they seemed to be taking pleasure in others' misfortune. The bald youth also seemed to be in high spirits. He cupped his hands in obeisance, and expressed his gratitude to the surrounding people. There was a confident look in his eyes, as if he was already a winner. A few people arranged a couple of stone desks. They placed all the required stuff on those desks like a bottle of magic ink, magic brushes, charm papers, a spirit stone of wind element and a sand glass. Then, Shi Mu and the bald youth occupied their respective desks. The competition begins. The arrogant look vanished from the bald man's face as soon as Master Fang Shan made the announcement. He took a deep breath, and stabilized his state of mind. Then, he grasped a spirit stone in one hand, and a brush in the other. He dipped the brush in the magic ink, and started to draw characters at a steady and moderate pace. A green charm character appeared on his paper after a while. He hadn't made even the slightest mistake. However, Shi Mu didn't begin to draw the character immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and sat quietly for some time to adjust his breathing. He kept his eyes closed for almost a quarter of an hour. Then, he slowly opened his eyes. The surrounding audience seemed to be absorbed in a discussion. They were talking in whispering tones. All of these people were charm magicians. So, they knew the importance of time. They knew that one needed a long time to draw the body-lifting charm. The period of 1 hour was too less. But, Shi Mu had chosen to sit idle, and adjust his breathing for such a long period of time. His casual approach had made him the center of everyone's criticism. 10 charm characters had already appeared on the bald man's paper by this time. He was currently drawing the 11th character with rapt attention. Shi Mu bore a serene expression on his face. His face was as calm as the waveless surface of a pond. He picked up a piece of paper in a casual manner. Then, he held a brush and dipped it in the magic ink. His movements looked natural and skilled. The surrounding people started to press down the contemptuous thoughts as they saw Shi Mu's movements. Shi Mu's pupils shrank as he narrowed his eyes. However, he didn't use the extraordinary power of his golden pupils. Instead, he instilled his spirit power in the tip of his brush. He then lowered the brush on the paper, and gripped the spirit stone in his other hand. After that, he started to draw the first character. The body-lifting charm was a low-grade magic charm. It was considered to be the most complex low-grade wind attribute magic charm as it consisted of several charm characters and patterns. However, Shi Mu's facial expression looked calm. His brush moved smoothly on the paper, like a snake's body. Several twisted and intricate characters started to emerge on his paper. Shi Mu's skillful movements had rendered a graceful feeling to the surrounding people. Each of his strokes was clear and steady. There was no sluggishness in his drawing. A pale yellow light was wrapped around the tip of his brush. The finished characters were sparkling in a miraculous manner. There wasn't the slightest sign of unsteadiness in the flow of his magic power. The surrounding people's complexion was changing with each passing minute. They started to discuss in whispers. Shi Mu completed the last character of the charm with a flick of his wrist after a while. The completed charm on the paper radiated a faint glory. The luminescence then faded away, and the characters started to exude a vague green light. The body-lifting charm was finally completed. Master Fang Shang's eyes glinted in astonishment. Only a couple of minutes had passed. The bald youth had just finished one copy, and had barely started to draw the second charm by this time. He was so absorbed in his drawing that he didn't notice that Shi Mu had also completed the first magic charm. All the disciples were left stupefied. But, Shi Mu's facial expression remained unchanged, as if he wasn't aware of the surrounding people's reaction. He put the completed paper charm aside, and picked up another piece of paper. Then, he started to draw again. The exceedingly abstruse and complicated charm characters seemed to have become extremely simple to draw. They started to emerge on Shi Mu's paper in quick succession. The second charm took even lesser time. Now, the third charm was in progress. The surrounding people were quiet. There were no murmuring voices in the hall anymore. Shi Mu still had an expressionless look on his face. He looked similar to a precision machine that could easily draw complex paper charms. Jin Xiaohai's expression changed as she gazed at Shi Mu's serene facial expression. His face looked as calm as water. An incisive look appeared in her eyes. Suddenly, she turned around and walked towards the exit of the hall. She didn't look back even once. Nobody noticed her sudden departure, except for Master Fang Shang. But, she had been extremely quick. She had covered a great distance just in a blink of an eye. Master Feng Shang shook his head. Then, he stuck his gaze at Shi Mu's movements. A gleam of astonishment started to float in his eyes once again. He hadn't seen a miraculous charm magician like Shi Mu since ages. He was himself a star-grade magician. So, he could see that Shi Mu's charm-making skills had reached a proficient level. There were only a handful of spirit-grade magicians who had achieved this level. Shi Mu put down his brush with a sparkle of green light. He then looked at the sand glass, and realized that the time was nearly over. 5 body-lifting charms lay on his table. An abundant wind attribute spirit power was infused in them. After all, they were the wind element magic charms. The facial expression of the surrounding people had frozen. They looked at Shi Mu as if he was a monster. The bald youth also put down his brush on the desk. There were only 3 copies of body-lifting charms on his table. He nodded in satisfaction as he could draw 3 paper charms in the given time. His present performance had far surpassed his own expectations. He had beaten his own record by finishing 3 charms in an hour. He was delighted. He knew that it was rare to find a charm magician of magician apprentice level who could complete even 1 charm in an hour. He raised his head with a smile on his face. However, he was left thunderstruck. Shi Mu's desk was surrounded by almost all the disciples. However, only a handful of people stood by his desk. They had an embarrassed expression on their faces. "Time's up!" Master Feng Shang's voice resounded. The people surrounding Shi Mu's desk immediately stepped back. The bald man looked at Shi Mu's table. He saw 5 sparkling paper charms emitting a green light. His entire body started to shake. He couldn't believe his eyes. The winner is Shi Mu. So, the independent room goes to Shi Mu. No one should raise any objection from now on. Master Feng Shang bowed to Shi Mu to express his appreciation. He then turned around and whispered something in Qing Feng's ears. After that, he made an announcement and left the hall. Suddenly, the surrounding people were awakened from their stupefied state. They started to praise and congratulate Shi Mu. The crowd finally dispersed after some time. And, everyone resumed their work as if nothing had happened. They had already wasted a substantial amount of their precious time to watch the competition between Shi Mu and the bald youth. The bald youth glared at Shi Mu with piercing eyes. His complexion looked unsightly. He then shook his sleeves, and returned to his desk. Chapter 126, Talking about the Old Days. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Congratulations, Brother Shi. I didn't know that you had such a deep knowledge of making magic charms. You can guide a few people here if you've some free time. Feng Li came over to Shi Mu with a smile on his face. He then said, "Brother Feng is overpraising me. We can both consult with each other," Shi Mu replied politely. Feng Li then bid him goodbye and left. "Brother Shi, please come with me. I need to talk to you about the independent stone chamber." Qing Feng approached Shi Mu once everyone had left. He then started to walk in the direction of the stone chamber. Shi Mu followed him. They arrived at the entrance of the stone chamber after a while. Shi Mu raised his head and saw a carved inscription in the center of the stone chamber's door. The word Earth was inscribed in a green-blue color. They pushed the Earth inscription on the door, and entered the room. The room was more than 100 feet wide. It was fully equipped, except for the ordinary stone bed and a few other things. Several kinds of facilities to prepare paper charms were available in the room. A magic spell was carved on all the 4 walls of the room. It seemed to be the same restoration spell that Qing Feng had mentioned before. You'll receive an identity token for the Rat's Nest stronghold. You'll also need it in order to activate the restoration spell on the walls of this room, Qing Feng said. He then took out a token from his bosom, and handed it over to Shi Mu. It looked like a jade ornament. Shi Mu nodded and received the token. He then started to stimulate his magic power in order to pour it into the token. After that, he raised the token in the air and shook it. Suddenly, a white light spurted out of the white jade ornament, and dispersed in all the directions. The charm spell on the four walls started to brighten up. A cool breeze emerged, and started to blow gently in the room. Shi Mu felt it over his body. He felt as if his spirit had become rejuvenated. He could sense that the restoration of his magic power and physical strength would take about 1/3 of the usual time inside this room. Shi Mu nodded. He seemed to be satisfied with the environment of the room. Well, Brother Shi has undertaken a long journey. Moreover, he had to participate in a competition as soon as he arrived. You must be extremely tired. Take rest now. Wait till tomorrow. I'll come and assign you a task, Qing Feng explained to Shi Mu. Then, he left the room. Shi Mu examined the stone chamber. Then, he pushed open the door and walked out. He had planned to observe the entire stronghold since he was free until the next day. The same night, in the earth stone chamber, Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his bed. He was practicing the art of breeding heavenly elephants using his real qi. He opened his eyes after a long while. He had got a rough idea of the situation in the stronghold since he had explored it in detail. This stronghold was spread in all directions east, west, north, and south. However, there was only a single gateway for the entire stronghold. This place looked similar to a rat's burrow. It had rightly been named the rat's nest. The charm magicians were required to complete the tasks assigned to them by Senior Master Fang Shang during the daytime. After that, they were free to do anything. A few charm magicians practiced cultivation arts in their leisure time. A few disciples took up small tasks from the jade wall in the hall where charm papers were made in order to earn extra feat points. Moreover, the nearby land city was the home of one of the largest strongholds of the Union. So, it was convenient for the charm magicians to use their accumulated feat points in exchange for a lot of practice resources from the stronghold besides purchasing supplements for making paper charms. This was the perfect environment for Shi Mu. He had already reached the 4th level of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. However, he was stuck in a bottleneck. So, he needed regular time to concentrate on the practice of cultivating his art. But Shi Mu's brows wrinkled as Jin Xiaohai's silhouette appeared before his eyes. The woman had been looking at him in such a manner that he felt a little scared in his heart. Fortunately, Jin Xiaochai hadn't been selected by the Union as an elder of this stronghold. So, Shi Mu was a little relieved. However, he couldn't point out the time when he must have attracted the attention of this Xian Tian warrior. This thought continued to trouble Shi Mu. Suddenly, he heard a knock on the door of his stone chamber. His eyes moved. He stood up to open the door. He opened the door to find a youth standing outside. It was Feng Li. Oh! Brother Feng, please come in. Shi Mu's face didn't reveal any unusual expressions. Instead, he greeted Feng Li with a smile on his face. He then stepped aside to let Feng Li enter. I've come here to see you. I hope I'm not disturbing Brother Shi. How can you disturb me? I've just arrived here. There are several important matters which I wish to discuss with Brother Feng. They greeted each other, and sat down at the stone table. Oh! I never thought that we the school apprentices will meet again. It feels as if we're having a reunion. Tell me, did you really kill Jin Tian? The Wu family was extremely offended. The two families had promised big rewards for your capture. In fact, I heard that they had sent great warriors from their clans to chase after you. But, Brother Shi escaped, and joined the Black Demon sect. Feng Li started to recall their days in Feng City. He sighed as he spoke. It was a coincidence. I was saved by luck. Shi Mu recalled the past days. He sighed as a beautiful figure flashed through his mind. Then, Shi Mu narrated the incidents that had led him to join the Black Demon sect. He also told him about his meaningful relationship with Zhongxiu. According to Miss K, Zhongxiu had gained a lot of attention after being taken to the Wonderful Sound sect by Ye Hong Yao. And, this was all because of her strong bloodline. She had been a part of the sect since then. She hadn't been sent to the battlefield at the time of the barbarians' invasion. So, Shi Mu didn't need to worry about her safety. In fact, one couldn't get close to her easily. Shi Mu continued to think about the matter. Feng Li continued to chat with a neutral expression on his face. They both shared stories about how they joined their sects. According to Feng Li, the Black Fox had been wiped out by another gang a year after Shi Mu left the Feng city. More than half of the members of the Black Fox were killed in the attack. Only a few had been able to escape. Feng Li was one of the lucky people. He had then joined a robbers' gang to save himself from the enemies. He was a powerful youngster. So, he had become the leader of a small group. They had once robbed a few travelers. There was a young man among the travelers, and that man had an identity token of the Black Turtle sect. Feng Li had taken his token from him. After that, he had joined the Black Turtle sect. Shi Mu didn't believe Feng Li's words, especially the story of him joining the Black Turtle sect. But, he didn't think about getting into the depth of the story. Brother Shi has changed a lot in these years. I almost didn't recognize you when I met you, Feng Li said with a smile. The same is with you, Brother Feng. The Black Turtle sect deserves its position among the Great Seven sects. The cultivation technique in that sect is extremely mysterious. It can make one feel youthful, Shi Mu said. It seemed as if he wanted to ask something. He. This is the effect of my cultivation technique. It's called the secret art of rising Sunday. There's no use of this art, except for gaining a youthful body, Feng Li explained with a forced smile on his face. Oh. So, that's how it is. By the way, does Brother Feng know how Aunt Zhen and my younger sister are doing these days? They were facing difficult times back then. I too had unknowingly brought a lot of trouble on them, Shi Mu nodded his head and asked in a hesitant manner. Aunt Zhen had been very good to him back then. And, Shi Yu Huan was Shi Mu's only blood relative. So, Shi Mu was extremely concerned about them. When Brother Shi killed Jin Tian, it was considered to be an enormous thing in Feng City. Even the ancestors of the Jin family were startled. Your Aunt Zhen also received its implication. But, her punishment wasn't too severe. She was forbidden from the Jin clan. Your younger sister Shi Yu Huan got enrolled into the Kai Yuan martial arts school. But, I have no idea how they're doing these days, Feng Li thought for a while and said. Shi Mu let out a sigh of relief as he heard these words. They continued to chat for some time. Then, Feng Li bid Shi Mu goodbye and left the room. It was late night. Not a single sound could be heard. The moon shone brightly in the sky. There was an exit in the western part of the Rat's Nest stronghold. A shadow quietly escaped from the exit, and rushed into the mountainous region. It was none other than Shi Mu. He had climbed halfway through the mountain peak within a short span of time. He then found a flat surface, and sat down cross-legged. The moonlight shone brightly on his body. Shi Mu finally entered into his dreamland. The dead spirit world. There was a section of plain land near a tall mountain peak. There were several potholes on the surface of the land. Moreover, there was a 10 feet wide puddle near the foot of the mountain. Several skeletal remains were scattered in a haphazard manner at the edge of that puddle. The skeletons seemed to be of different sizes. If the scattered bones were joined together to form complete skeletons, then it could be estimated that a total of 6 human skeletons lay near the puddle. Air bubbles emerged from the surface of the water in a continuous manner. Nothing unusual could be seen, except for the fact that the color of the water was an abnormal red. Yan Luo lay under the puddle. It was opening and closing its mouth in a continuous manner. It seemed to be inhaling the bloody water. It then rose to in order to spit out the blood. It continued to inhale and spit out the blood for a while. After that, the red color of the water started to become a little dull. The color of the water in the small puddle eventually became transparent. The redness in the water seemed to have completely disappeared. Crash! Suddenly, the green flame in Yan Luo's eye sockets flickered. It then stood up, and stepped out of the puddle. 2 years had passed since Shi Mu had placed a contract on Yan Luo. Yan Luo didn't seem much different than before. But, its body had become firmer, and the soul flame in its eyes had become stronger. Now, Yan Luo had a blade on its sides. It also had a simple and crude bone armor wrapped around its body. The armor covered its arms, pelvis, and other important joints. Yan Luo looked at the puddle. The light of the 12 round blood moons was shining on the surface of the water. Suddenly, the transparency of the water started to fade, and it started to turn red once again. However, it was turning red at a very slow rate. The time it would take to transform into complete red couldn't be estimated. Yan Luo looked away from the surface of the water. It didn't seem to be interested in it anymore. It then turned around, and started to walk towards a distant place. At the hillside near the rat's nest stronghold. The sky was clear. Shi Mu's body shook as he came back from his dreamland. 1 month later, inside the stone chamber. Shi Mu sat on the stone bed with a white jade porcelain bottle in his hand. He seemed to be lost in thoughts. He had been using his splendid paper charm making skills to help the stronghold in completing the emergency tasks assigned by the Union. He had gained recognition from Master Fang Shang and the other charm masters in the stronghold. Now, he was in a similar position as that of the other 2 spirit-ranked charm masters under Master Fang Shang's supervision. He was free to use all the materials in the storehouse at his will for the purpose of making paper charms. But, he was required to sacrifice his feat points if he wanted to use the materials for himself. The Union had issued a red-lettered task a few days ago. Shi Mu had broken all records in completing this task. So, the Union had also broken the rules, and had awarded him for making an exceptional contribution in the success of the task. He had been rewarded with a breakthrough pill. Breakthrough pill, as the name suggests, helped a warrior in breaking through a bottleneck at different levels. Its effect was more remarkable for the Houtian warriors. It was very rare as it was extremely difficult to refine. Shi Mu was hopeful that he would break through the 4th level of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with the help of this pill. Shi Mu put the porcelain bottle aside. He seemed to have taken a decision. He sat down in his stone bed, and exhibited the meditative posture. He then closed his eyes, and started to adjust his breathing. Chapter 127, Blocking His Way. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A wisp of real qi started to flow from Shi Mu's lower abdomen as his chest rose and fell rhythmically. It then turned into a tiny stream, and started to circulate in his entire body through his veins and arteries. Then, it returned to his lower abdomen. Shi Mu continued to absorb spiritual energy from his surroundings, and integrated it with the tiny stream of his real qi. This process eventually strengthened his real qi. The flowing speed of his real qi continued to gain momentum as the cycle continued to repeat itself. It eventually transformed into a powerful current of real qi that surged through the veins and meridians in his entire body. Shi Mu's entire body was shrouded in a thin layer of mist. His skin appeared moist and red in color. His veins had also protruded all over his body. It looked as if earthworms were trying to crawl out of his body. A hint of unendurable suffering flashed in Shi Mu's eyes. It seemed as if there were countless air masses of sesame seeds inside his muscles that were trying to bulge out from his skin. The flow of his real qi had reached its maximum limit by now. Shi Mu grabbed the jade bottle, and poured the breakthrough pill into his mouth. He felt as if 1,000 pieces of cold ice were rolling down into his abdomen. Then, an inexhaustible coldness started to spread through his bones and limbs. Shi Mu's body started to tremble because of the cold feeling. He felt as if his blood had frozen. Then, his face turned pale. Suddenly, the galloping current of his real qi came to a standstill. Even the continuous compression of his real qi had become denser under the force of the inexplicable coldness. The thin wisp of his real qi swelled up after a while, and turned into a huge stream of qi, like a mighty river. Then, it exploded and turned into a howling flood. Boom! There was an explosion within his body. The impact of this explosion rendered a powerful jolt to his heart. Shi Mu felt an indescribable force rushing out of his lower abdomen. Suddenly, he felt as if his skin had received a powerful blow, in the same manner as a piece of thin paper is pricked open. Then, a massive amount of spiritual energy rushed forth into his body from his surroundings. He felt that the air around him was incredibly fresh. The fresh air filled his entire body with a sense of inexplicable comfort and happiness, like a prisoner who hadn't seen the sky for many years. Then, the layer of mist shrouding his body vanished into thin air. His body seemed to have regained its normal form. Shi Mu tightened his fists in order to examine his strength. He was delighted to discover that his entire body was brimming with overwhelming energy. His strength had tremendously increased, it seemed to have increased by an elephant's strength. He had finally succeeded in breaking through the 5th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. The bottleneck had seemed like a huge wall to Shi Mu before he had consumed the pill. But, it started to feel like a piece of thin paper that he needed to puncture once he had taken the pill. It had been aptly named the breakthrough pill. Shi Mu was overwhelmed with excitement. He stood up and started to throw his fists and feet into the air. Each of his movements produced a strong gust of wind. Bang! Bang! Continuous sounds of chi explosion were heard as he pounded his feet and fists in the air. The strong gusts of wind produced by his stone-breaking fist felt like a real punch. However, these movements couldn't satisfy his desire. So, he drew out his black blade and began to practice the 13 series of Gale Force knife art. He then saw a beam of black light, it was similar to a dazzling bolt of lightning. Suddenly, it started to float in the air around his body. The glint of his blade was divided into 2 parts with 6 or 7 shadows each. Then, all the 13 blade shadows darted towards a common spot in the air in order to launch a converging attack. Shi Mu continued to practice for half an hour. He then went back to his bed, and sat down cross-legged. His eyes flickered a few times as he sank into a deep contemplation. He had tried to practice the art of breeding a strong evil ape right after he had entered the 4th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. But, he hadn't succeeded since his real chi hadn't been formidable enough to withstand the gigantic force. But, he hadn't given up. Instead, he had taken a lesson from his failure. He knew that he would have enough real chi in his lower abdomen to resist the corroding force of devil's chi once he had ascended to the 5th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. 12 blood-red moons were suspended in the dark grey sky. A small puddle could be seen in a brown mountain valley, it was only 5 feet in diameter. Its blood-red water appeared vibrant in the gloomy surroundings. Several fragments of human skeletons could be seen lying disorderly around the puddle. The bones seemed to belong to around 5 human skeletons. 3 skeletons in bone armors stood around a single skeleton. The 3 skeletons seemed to have besieged that lone skeleton. The lone skeleton held a bone blade in one of its hands. It was wearing a shattered bone armor. It was none other than Yan Luo. Several fractured ribs and numerous fissures could be seen all over its body through its broken armor. A couple of its bones seemed to be missing. The upper part of its body looked as if it was about to crumble. Clank, a metal clanging sound was heard. Yan Luo waved its bone blade, and swept away 2 curved daggers. Those daggers were thrown at Yan Luo from the front. But, its entire body was jolted by the mighty force of the counterattack. Suddenly, a snow-white bone spear was thrown at Yan Luo from another side. The upper part of Yan Luo's body would have separated from its lower body if the spear had hit its target. Yan Luo couldn't have dodged this attack as its body was in a miserable condition. However, the black charm character sealed in its soul flame flashed at the exact moment. Suddenly, the green flame within its eye sockets became brighter. And, Yan Luo became wittier and nimbler all of a sudden. Yan Luo moved its body to one side with a strange movement, and evaded the spear. It then moved a step forward, and wielded its pale white bone blade. The blade chopped down the head of the skeleton who wielded that long spear. Suddenly, an air-piercing sound was heard as two daggers launched an attack on Yan Luo. Yan Luo knelt down and dodged the daggers. Bang! Bang! Both the skeletons were cut off from their waists with two crisp sounds. They fell to the ground, and stopped moving. Another set of crisp sounds were heard as their skulls tumbled to the ground. Yan Luo stood up. Then, it moved and stomped on the skulls scattered near the puddle. A ball of green light was released as soon as a skull was crushed. Yan Luo sucked up all the green light balls. This made its soul's flame a little bigger than before. Then, it started to search through the pile of bones, and found a few solid bones. After that, it replaced its damaged and missing bones with the good ones. It had soon replaced all the damaged parts of its body. Yan Luo smiled as it looked at its body. The green flames in its eyes flickered as it gazed at the small red puddle. It had subconsciously started to look for similar puddles ever since it had immersed itself in one for the first time. A voice kept ringing in its mind telling it that this kind of a red puddle could make it stronger. Yan Luo then drifted into the pool, and slowly submerged its body into the water. Several bubbles started to emerge from the surface of the water after a while. Shi Mu followed the mountain road as he advanced towards the rat's nest stronghold that was situated deep into the Xianling Mountains. He had just exchanged his feat points for a bottle of pure devil's qi. He had traded it from the largest stronghold in the land city. He had also bought 3 bottles of an ordinary ape's essence and blood. Shi Mu was curious to see the body-strengthening effects of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. He expected this art to benefit him in a significant manner. He was so restless that he wanted to return to the stronghold as soon as possible in order to start the practice of this art. However, his complexion changed as he turned around a corner. His body froze on the spot. An exceptionally beautiful woman clad in a golden dress stood in front of him. She had a charming smile on her face. She was waiting for him. It seemed that she knew that Shi Mu would come from this way. Who else could she be except for Jin Xiaochai? Senior Jin, it's an honor for your disciple to see you here. Shi Mu sighed in his heart. He then braced himself, and bowed to her with veneration. You and I have walked the same path in troubled times. Moreover, we're old acquaintances. So, you don't have to be overly courteous. Anyways, how are you doing in the rat's nest? Jin Xiaochai giggled and asked. Meanwhile, she started to walk towards Shi Mu. Her glittering pupils were gazing at Shi Mu with great interest. A gentle and passionate smile was gleaming across the corners of her mouth. This disciple wouldn't dare to be impolite. This stronghold is much better than the other places, where we have to put our lives on the line every day. Speaking of which, I must express my gratitude to Senior Jin for her gracious recommendation. Shi Mu moved 2 steps backwards as he saw Jin Xiaochai advance towards him. There was a huge turmoil in his heart even though his tone was dripping with respect. He had a bad premonition. A seductive and attractive girl was gazing at him like this. This meant that she had some ulterior motives. I recommended you so that a genius of our sect can get an efficient training. It was my duty. You don't need to thank me. Elder Fang admires you a lot. He told me that you've been rewarded with a breakthrough pill. You seem to be in a hurry. It seems that you wish to make a progress in a cultivation art, that is on the verge of a breakthrough, right? Jin Xiaochai pursed her lips and asked with a smile. Then, she moved a step forward as her beautiful eyes gazed at Shi Mu. Shi Mu subconsciously took a few steps backwards under her beautiful and piercing gaze. He then lowered his head and said, This disciple does have a cultivation art, that is stuck in a bottleneck since a long time. So, I wanted to break through the bottleneck by taking advantage of this valuable opportunity. I appreciate your efforts. Feel free to consult me if you bump into any problem while practicing your arts. Jin Xiaochai saw through Shi Mu's hesitation since he didn't dare to look at her. She moved a few steps forward to tease him. A gleam of a ridiculing smile flashed on her charming face. Shi Mu's heart skipped a beat as a puff of delicate fragrance entered his nose. He quickly took another step backwards. However, he felt a cold object touching his back. It was the cliff. He hadn't realized that he had reached at the base of the cliff. Senior Jin has showered me with her graciousness. Please let me know if I can do anything for you. Shi Mu's restlessness grew even more intense. Suddenly, a dignified look appeared in his eyes. He then raised his head and spoke courageously while he looked into her eyes. Why are you so nervous? Don't tell me that you're afraid of being devoured by me. You look young and handsome. If I'm not wrong, then you must be single. So, do you want me to introduce a beautiful female disciple to you? Jin Xiaochai spoke with an adorable smile. Meanwhile, she continued to move towards him. Thank you for your kindness, young Senior Jin. But, this disciple just wants to cultivate and practice the arts. Anything else isn't my concern right now. Shi Mu hurriedly waved his hand and turned down her offer. Hee. Is there any man who doesn't like a beautiful woman? You can rest assured. The disciple I'll introduce to you has the same features and figure as me. Jin Xiaochai flashed a charming smile. She had come unreasonably close to him by that time. Shi Mu was alarmed. He tried to step aside. But, Jin Xiaohai's right hand stretched out and flashed past his face like a bolt of lightning. She then rested her hand against the cliff to support herself. Then, she pressed her body against his chest. Shi Mu felt a whiff of sweet fragrance against his face. He started to feel extremely uncomfortable, and his mouth turned dry. Jin Xiaohai's face was so close to him that it was almost touching his cheek. She was looking at him with a coquettish look in her eyes. Jin Xiaochai was blessed with an enchanting beauty. She looked even more lovable as she was extremely close to Shi Mu. She opened her lips and blew a puff of warm breath on Shi Mu's face. Her plentiful breasts seemed to be bursting from her clothes, and were pushing against Shi Mu's chest. This inexplicable seductive charm made Shi Mu's heart beat like a drum. His heart was thrown into a complete disorder, it started to pound uncontrollably. He felt a wisp of hot blood rush to his brain. Jin Xiaochai had come extremely close to him. Shi Mu had lost his calm after laying his eyes on such an irresistible and mesmerizing beauty. Her pink pouty lips and alluring appearance could make any man want to kiss her. There's a pretty female disciple who looks exactly like me. But, you still don't wish to consider her. Jin Xiaochai drew closer to him. She slightly opened her lips, and blew another puff of warm breath on Shi Mu's face. Then, she asked in a lovable and pleading voice. This disciple is already interested in someone. Senior Jin, please show some dignity and self-respect. Shi Mu bit his tongue as he got a grip on himself. A calm and painful look appeared in his vision. He then gnashed his teeth and replied in a relentless manner. Chapter 128, Practicing the Art of Breeding a Strong Evil Ape. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Oh! I didn't know that you have a loved one despite being so young. I wish to know who she is. Jin Xiaohai's eyes lit up as she asked. This. Shi Mu became hesitant. Why do you look so indecisive? Is it possible that you are saying this to deceive me? Jin Xiaohai's complexion turned cold, and her smile disappeared. This disciple will never dare to deceive you. Shi Mu became frightened, so much so that he got goosebumps. Well, then, tell me about her. I won't embarrass you, if it's true. Jin Xiaohai's tone softened a bit. She moved a bit away from him. There was now a little distance between Shi Mu and her. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. She's a beautiful demon witch from the Tianyin sect. Shi Mu's eyes became firm. He didn't intend to hide anything now. Demon witch? I didn't hear it wrong, did I? Do you know that she's a rare genius from the Tianyin sect? Such a skillful warrior can only be seen once in a century. She stepped into the realm of Xiantian warriors at the young age of 20. Moreover, she's the only disciple of Elder Gongsun Yu, an earth-ranked master of the Tianyin sect. The charming expression on Jin Xiaohai's face vanished. She looked at Shi Mu as if he was a fool. The trace of a strange look flashed through her eyes. But, it couldn't be detected since she hid it quickly. The demon witch has an agreement with this young disciple, that I can go to Wanlong Mountains and meet her if I become a Xian Tian warrior before reaching the age of 30. Shi Mu wasn't affected by the sudden change in Jin Xiaohai's language. He. Jin Xiaochai started to laugh as she heard these words, as if it was the funniest thing in the world. Her delicate laughter made it seem as if the blossoming plants had started to sway in the breeze. She rubbed her belly and bowed, and she continued to laugh for a long time. Then, she turned around and walked away without even casting a glance at Shi Mu. It would have looked like a dream if it wasn't for her fragrance that still lingered in the air. Shi Mu's eyes flickered. He looked at the departing figure of Jin Xiaochai, and clenched his fists tightly. He had confronted Jin Xiaochai only a moment ago. And, he had felt powerless in front of this Xian Tian warrior. The contemptuous laughter that Jin Xiaochai had displayed before she had left had made an unforgettable impression on Shi Mu's heart. He knew that Jin Xiaohai's intentions weren't good even though he didn't know the reason why she had approached him over and over again. Therefore, it had suddenly become extremely important for him to enhance his strength as soon as possible. He had to become even stronger. He had to honor the commitment he had made to his mother. Moreover, he had to reduce the gap between him and the demon witch. Shi Mu once again looked in the direction of the disappearing figure of Jin Xiaochai. He then turned around, and started to walk towards his room. Shi Mu sat on the stone bed as soon as he reached his stone chamber. He spent more than the usual time in order to calm down his chaotic mind. Then, he closed his eyes, and continued to recall the art of breeding a strong evil ape until he was satisfied that he was doing it correctly. Then, he stood up and started to practice the first level of the art. Shi Mu started to absorb the spiritual energies from his surroundings along with the revolution of the cultivation technique. It was different from the art of breeding heavenly elephants. And, these energies didn't go into his veins and arteries in a smooth manner. Instead, they went inwards in the same manner a snowflake drops into the water. Then, they blended into Shi Mu's body. Moreover, he could feel their up and down movement under his skin. These spiritual energies rushed and stimulated the movement of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. Then, they got transformed into small crystal grains. And, these crystal grains were so small that they couldn't be observed with naked eyes. These grains then got stored in Shi Mu's body. Several hundreds of these crystal grains passed through him within the next few minutes. Shi Mu felt extremely happy. The art of breeding a strong evil ape was indeed an effective cultivation technique. Moreover, it was easy to practice. In addition, the progress made by this technique seemed to be exceptionally fast. 3 hours later, Shi Mu's body shook slightly. He then opened his eyes as he stopped his practice. He practically fell onto his bed in a paralyzed state. Suddenly, his hands moved, and he lowered himself to the ground. He then closed his eyes, and started to practice the art once again. He felt a little difference in his body, but he wasn't sure. Shi Mu smiled. The circulation of energy in his veins was sluggish since he possessed the wasted blood of Stone Monkey. So, Shi Mu's progression in the Houtian arts was much slower than Bai Shi and the other disciples. However, the flow of real qi in his veins had nothing to do with it because the art of breeding a strong evil ape was meant to assist one's cultivation techniques. So, it was only meant for cultivating one's physical strength. Shi Mu was carefree because he hadn't encountered any obstacle while practicing this technique. Shi Mu rejoiced in his heart. He felt lucky that he had picked the art of breeding a strong evil ape. This art had proved to be the most suitable for the cultivation of Houtian arts. Shi Mu lived in seclusion for around a month after that. He spent some of his time to complete the tasks assigned by the Union. And, he continued to torture himself in the cultivation of the art of breeding a strong evil ape with the rest of his time. Therefore, he reached the consummate stage of the art of breeding a strong evil ape's first layer in a short period of time. And, the time had finally arrived for the first blood and marrow cleansing process. Shi Mu sat on his bed in his stone chamber. He sized up the bottles in front of him with a frightened expression on his face. One of the bottles had a metallic luster on its surface, it was as big as a human palm. It was made up of blue copper. The size of the other 3 white porcelain bottles was also the same. He picked up the blue copper bottle in his left hand. He then opened the lid of the bottle with his right hand, and shook it several times. Suddenly, a cloud of black fog gas floated out of the mouth of the bottle. The cloud of black fog got diffused into the atmosphere, as if it had come in contact with an uncomfortable environment. Suddenly, it started to ring in a restless manner. Then, it started to descend rapidly, and fell straight to the ground. It seemed as if a snowflake had fallen gently on the surface of water. Then, it disappeared in a blink of an eye. Shi Mu nodded. Demon Qi was a special kind of energy that was produced on an evil and filthy piece of land. Therefore, it strongly repelled the spiritual energy of the nature. It was generally found in the depths of some abyss. He pondered for a while. Then, he opened one of the 3 white porcelain bottles. A smell of blood came floating out it. It was the essence of the blood of apes and monkeys. He opened the lid of the copper bottle. Suddenly, a ray of blood flashed. Shi Mu then poured the entire essence of the blood of ape and monkey into the copper bottle. The essence of the blood of ape and monkey transformed into a blood flame as soon as it was poured into the bottle. In the same manner as the oil is poured into the fire. A black fog appeared and fluctuated, as if a black python had appeared in the fog. It swallowed the entire blood flame, and started to hover wildly inside the bottle. The blood flame became smaller and smaller with the passage of time. It seemed as if the black python had slowly digested the flames. The evil spirit of the black python transformed into black fog as soon as the blood flames disappeared. A red light could be seen penetrating through the fog. Shi Mu repeated the entire process with the other bottles. The 2 remaining bottles that contained the essence of the blood of ape and monkey were quickly swallowed by the evil spirit. And, the black fog accumulated brighter and more distinct blood-colored lights inside it. There was a look of satisfaction in Shi Mu's eyes. He put the lid on the copper bottle, and kept it aside. After that, Shi Mu exhibited a meditative posture. He then adjusted his breathing, and started to meditate. Shi Mu's heart moved after a moment. Then, the art of breeding a strong evil ape started to work slowly. Countless crystal grains started to appear within Shi Mu's body. However, nothing could be seen from the outside. But, the spirit energy seemed to have been held back by something. It didn't seem capable of entering Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu picked up the blue copper bottle in his right hand. He then opened the bottle's lid, and poured its content into his body without any hesitation. A large cloud of black fog came out flying from the copper bottle. A red light flashed in the midst of the black fog. It seemed to have activated something. It was about to start descending when it changed its course, and started to move in Shi Mu's direction. Then, it wrapped Shi Mu's body tightly. Shi Mu's complexion turned white. And, cold sweat started to come out of his body. The demon Qi reached his body in a flash. He felt as if every part of his body was being pierced by several needles at the same time. He felt an indescribable pain. Shi Mu felt as if his skin was being torn off his body. Shi Mu clenched his teeth tightly. His heart was beating like a drum, and his entire body was trembling. The demon Qi had plunged within his body, and had started to conflict with the tiny crystal grains that had been formed by the art of breeding a strong evil ape. And, the crystals got shattered after they came in contact with the demon Qi. Then, every crystal transformed into an invisible form of strange energy. After that, the energy and the demon Qi got entangled. There wasn't a single part of Shi Mu's body that wasn't aching with the shattering of those crystals inside his body. Even his mind seemed to have been teared apart with sharp pain. His facial features had been distorted. Suddenly, a thick blue vein stuck out of his forehead and neck. The pulse started to throb, and his muscles began to twitch in an uncontrollable manner. Shi Mu had never felt such a severe pain before. In fact, it would have been better to die than to bear this pain. Shi Mu couldn't think of anything else. The demon qi entered into every pore of the Shi Mu's body. It then invaded his internal organs and bones. Shi Mu's pain was becoming more severe with each passing moment. He felt an unspeakable pain as the demon qi entered into his bone marrow. Then, the crystals transformed into a strange energy. This energy also entered every part of Shi Mu's body along with the demon qi. It was getting absorbed by his body in a continuous manner. His physique was slowly being transformed. The art of breeding a strong evil ape was affecting his corporeal body with the support of demon qi in order to attain the results of the blood and marrow cleansing process. The real qi also started to revolve in Shi Mu's body at the same time. But, it was resisting the invasion of demon qi in a continuous manner. And, it was trying to protect his vital meridians. However, Shi Mu hadn't purchased an ordinary demon qi, it was a high quality, and the purest form of the yin demon qi. The negative qi of the yin attribute demon qi also integrated with Shi Mu's real qi with the help of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. After an hour, the black fog wrapped around Shi Mu's body finally dissipated. The strength of the demon qi had finally got exhausted. Shi Mu had successfully undergone his first blood and marrow cleansing process of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. The art of breeding a strong evil ape had stopped working. Shi Mu's body finally loosened up. Suddenly, his body got paralyzed, and he collapsed on his bed like a dead fish. His expressions were slackened, and his lips were pale. His entire body was covered in sweat, and some kind of a dirty liquid. He felt sticky and extremely unwell. He restored his physical strength after he had rested for half an hour. He then washed his body with clean water. And, his renewed spirit started to resonate in a flash. Shi Mu observed his body. He then moved his limbs. He felt happy to discover that his body had become unreasonably strong. His speed and strength had increased by bounds. Moreover, the quality of his skin had also improved. Its toughness and the defensive strength had enhanced to the level beyond one's imagination. Suddenly, he felt an ice-cold aura in his abdomen. So, Shi Mu thought of the situation when he had tempered his body. He stood up and muttered something to himself. The art of breeding heavenly elephant and his real qi started to revolve within his body as he raised the tip of his brow. He stood up in excitement after a short while. He noticed that the strength of yin energy was now under his command. It had successfully blended with his real qi in his lower abdomen. He stroked his fist, as if he was boxing with the wind. Suddenly, a cold air erupted, and flit through the air at a high speed like a gale of cold wind. Shi Mu was ecstatic. The strength of his yin energy was extremely weak at present. But, Shi Mu was sure that his yin energy would enough to severely injure his enemies in its incorporeal form once he had reached the 5th level of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. However, he still felt a fear as he thought about the blood and marrow cleansing process. But, the fear was soon replaced with a determined look on his face. The art of breeding a strong evil ape had the capacity to surpass Shi Mu's imagination. It could unexpectedly integrate the yin energy of the demon qi with his real qi. So, Shi Mu would never give up. Chapter 129, The Soul Comforting Spell. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. 2 months passed by in a flash. The time had arrived when Shi Mu had to undergo the second blood and marrow cleansing process of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. He had already prepared himself mentally for this process. But the internal torment of this pain was far more intense than the one he had experienced during the first cleansing process. Shi Mu was an extremely strong person with an inhuman perseverance and an unyielding disposition. However, the excruciating pain was too much for him to endure. Fortunately, he had stepped into the 5th level of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. This art had always helped him in protecting his veins and arteries. Therefore, he could manage to endure such a devastating pain till the end. He beamed with happiness as he realized that his body had become even more tenacious. His physical strength had also improved unimaginably. He had achieved this feat only after the successful completion of the second layer of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. The strength, speed, and tenacity of his body had increased by 2/3 of the total strength he possessed before he began to practice of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. This realization pumped up his confidence. Therefore, he continued to practice so that he could ascend to the third level as soon as possible. He strengthened himself once again for the third wave of pain after a period of 3 months. However, he found out that he wasn't as fortunate as he was during his previous 2 sessions. In Shi Mu's stone room, Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his stone bed. An extremely painful expression could be seen across his face. The upper part of his body was bare, and it was smeared in blood. It seemed as if someone had been cutting at his muscles with a knife that had an inch-deep sharp edge. Each pore of his body was spurting out blood in a continuous manner. Even his bed was soaked in blood. Shi Mu also felt an unbearable numbness in marrow, it was mixed with itchiness as well. It seemed as if his marrows were being gnawed and devoured by hundreds of ants. The intensity of the pain was almost double of the previous times. The psychological pain he suffered was so torturous that Shi Mu was almost on the verge of a collapse. Shi Mu felt as if a layer of darkness had covered his eyes. Then, he collapsed on the spot. Shi Mu regained his consciousness after an unknown period of time. He tried to shake his head in an attempt to shake off the dizziness and heaviness that he felt. But, he couldn't move. Shi Mu was startled. He touched his body and realized that a layer of long white hair had sprouted all over his body. Surprisingly, he had entered his dreamland again, he had already transformed into the mystical white ape. However, he was surprised to notice his new surroundings. He wasn't at the familiar cliff with a huge rock on its top. It was rather a huge open space that was surrounded by boundless sea of a vast and verdant forest. A vast forest could be seen in the distance. The trees in the forest were extremely wide, so much so that a single tree would require dozens of people to surround it from all sides. Moreover, they were thousands of feet high. It looked as if the towering trees were stretching into the sky above the boundless sea of clouds. Suddenly, a loud rumble shook the earth. This explosion pulled Shi Mu's consciousness back into the ape's body. Shi Mu realized that the white ape wasn't practicing the moon-swallowing art as before. Instead, most of its body was buried in the ground. Only its hairy head stuck out from its surface. In addition, the white ape was in the center of numerous strange charm characters and patterns drawn on the ground. These densely packed characters and patterns were exuding intermittent bursts of dazzling silver light like a vast sky full of stars. These heavenly patterns and characters were extended in all directions, they constituted a huge magic formula. But, it was difficult to see the magic spell clearly owing to the hazy light. 2 yellow-cloaked giants stood on the either side of the huge formula. They were 100 feet tall and were as sturdy as 2 small mountains. They had shiny bald heads, not a single hair could be seen on their heads. They looked extremely ugly with ghastly facial features like that of a ferocious ghost. Several muscles were protruding out from every part of their bodies. Glittering silver characters were drawn on the surface of their yellow cloaks. The 2 of them bore an expressionless look on their faces. Both of them held the hilt of a 100 feet long and bright silvery iron hammer in their hands. The 2 giants were pounding their hammers at a certain point in the magic spell in a continuous manner. An earth-shaking rumble was produced every time their hammers hit the ground. The surface of the gigantic hammers would shoot out a beam of silver light into the huge magic spell at the same time. This would stir up the silver lights on the surface of the spell. Then, these lights would dangle in a wild manner. Shi Mu was at the center of the formula. He could feel an intermittent burst of vibration in the ground around him. In addition, he felt as if a strange and cold energy had shrouded him, and was squeezing him in a continuous manner. This strange energy felt like a freezing cold liquid. The extrusion force of the strange energy grew stronger as the speed of the sledgehammers grew quicker. Meanwhile, Shi Mu felt that the temperature of his body was declining. Then, the boundless strange energies started to penetrate his body through the white ape's pores. The strange energies felt like countless tiny needles. PSST. The white ape contorted its face in agony, and issued a shrill screech. The tiny cold energies intruded into the ape's body. Then, they started to shroud its vital organs. It felt as if thousands of tiny needles were incessantly pricking at its internal organs. The inexplicable suffering Shi Mu was enduring through the ape was tormenting to the extent that he wanted to die. This inexpressible pain was even more frightening for Shi Mu. It was because the fits of pain he was undergoing currently was several times more excruciating and tormenting than what he had undergone during the cleansing process. A white-haired elderly man sat cross-legged on a dark green cushion that floated in the air dozens of feet away from the huge and sparkling formula. The old man had long and white eyebrows and beard. He looked towards the white ape that was still screaming in pain. His long eyebrows were curved upwards. He pinched his fingers, and started to recite something in a low voice. He was the same mysterious elderly man who had imparted the moon-swallowing art to the white ape earlier in Shi Mu's dream. Shi Mu was on the brink of another breakdown. This agonizing pain was so torturous that his consciousness had nearly become blurry. He felt as if he was about to pass out in the next few breaths. He was unable to hold any more since the pain was beyond his capacity to endure. Suddenly, the sonorous sound of an inexplicable incantation resounded in his ear. It was being recited by the elderly man. The white ape opened its wide mouth, and started to imitate the elderly man as soon as it heard the incantation. It then began to read the words despite the intolerable pain. The language of the incantation was extremely strange. But, it sounded familiar to Shi Mu, as if he had studied it thousands of times. Then, something strange happened. The pain in Shi Mu's body and spirit began to neutralize as he read the incantation in the form of the white ape. His pain was suppressed in a flash. The lingering pain was still hard to endure. However, it was fairly tolerable now. Shi Mu was pleasantly surprised by this strange occurrence. But then, he felt dizzy and his eyes rolled back. He had passed out before he could understand anything. After some time, in Shi Mu's stone chamber, Shi Mu opened his eyes. He found himself lying on the bed in his room. He had finally returned from his trance. He didn't attempt to move. His head was still gripped by a sense of a strange heaviness. An overwhelming dizziness overcame him once again. It was accompanied by a fit of numbness that struck his limbs. The excruciating pain that he had experienced during the third bone and marrow cleansing session had far surpassed his expectations. This reminded him of Meng Gu's warning. He was the caretaker of the blood pavilion. He had warned him that the deadliest disadvantage of the art of breeding a strong evil ape was the process of cleansing one's blood and marrow. Suddenly, his body shuddered as he realized that there was something unusual about his body. He felt that his physical toughness had once again improved substantially. Moreover, the yin qi that was stored in his lower abdomen had increased tremendously. Shi Mu was once again pleasantly surprised. He had successfully undergone the third blood and marrow cleansing session. Suddenly, a strange thought dawned upon him. He had a feeling that his successful breakthrough was related to the dream he had just seen. He knew that he had managed to cross this hurdle only because of the incantation that white-haired elderly man had recited. It was evident that the secret art that elderly man had imparted to him in the dream had played a major role in this breakthrough. It had significantly relieved the pain he was undergoing at that time. Shi Mu racked his brains in an attempt to recall the incantation that the white ape had learned in the dream. But, his memory seemed to be fuzzy. And, he couldn't recall even a single word. However, he couldn't give up so easily. He sprang up from his bed after a momentary consideration. He washed the blood off his body with the clean water that he had prepared beforehand. Then, he changed into clean clothes. After that, he grasped his black blade, and walked out of the stronghold. It was midnight. And, the bright moon hung in the sky. Shi Mu followed the familiar path, and arrived in the woods. He examined his surroundings to ensure that nothing was unusual. After that, he drew his black blade and dug a hole in the open ground. He then jumped into it without any hesitation. Suddenly, his right palm transformed into a translucent and sparkling fist. It was similar to a piece of jade. He then pounded it forcefully. Ping! Suddenly, the surrounding soil collapsed and buried his body. Only his head was sticking out from the surface of the ground. Shi Mu closed his eyes, and entered the dreamland once again. Everything happened just as he had expected. The white ape appeared at the center of the giant formula. Two yellow-cloaked giants stood on either sides of the formula with two mighty hammers in their hands. Their hammers were pounding on the ground in quick succession. Then, the fit of intolerable acute pain befell him as before. Shi Mu woke up from the dream with a jolt after a while. And, his forehead was covered in sweat. However, he didn't crawl out of the pit. Instead, he knitted his eyebrows and tried to recall the incantation he had heard in the dream. However, he was disappointed. He couldn't remember anything even though his memory had become clearer. Shi Mu clenched his teeth, closed his eyes and slipped into the dream once again. He repeated this process over and over again. He would wake up, and then enter the dream again. He would focus his attention to remember the incantation the white ape was reading in his dream. And, he had to endure severe pain every time he entered the dream. But, his sufferings finally paid off. And, the incantation gradually became clearer to him. He finally managed to memorize the strange incantation after 30 to 40 repetitions. 3 silver characters appeared in his mind as he recited this incantation for the first time, the soul-comforting spell. Shi Mu woke up from the dream once again. And, he immediately tried to repeat the incantation. He was exhilarated as he noticed that he had got a good grip on the incantation. Moreover, he could easily read the soul-comforting spell in that strange language. Bang! Shi Mu jumped out of the pit. He then straightened his clothes, and advanced towards the stronghold in high spirits. The sky was still dark. But, the moon had slid down the sky. The shadows of the surrounding trees were swaying under the dim light. Suddenly, a rustling sound was heard from the distance. It was followed by the sound of footsteps. It seemed as if a person was walking. Shi Mu's complexion changed. He grasped the black blade, and hid behind a clump of bushes. The sound gradually grew faint, as if the person was getting farther away. Shi Mu's complexion changed again. He squinted and quietly advanced towards the source of the sound. Shi Mu followed the sound for dozens of feet when it suddenly faded away. Shi Mu's eyes flickered, he stopped dead in his tracks suddenly, his nose twitched as a nasty smell of blood entered his nostrils. Shi Mu's complexion changed once again. He advanced towards the source of the smell, and arrived near a heap of rocks. He was startled as he saw what lay there. A spotted leopard lay in the pile of rocks. It was a huge leopard, it was almost 10 feet long. The skin and fur around its neck was badly mutilated. Shi Mu could clearly see the blood stains on its neck. It seemed that it had died rather recently. But, Shi Mu was dumbstruck as he noticed that the leopard's corpse was in a shriveled state, as if its spirit had been sucked out. Shi Mu moved towards the corpse in order to examine it. Suddenly, a foul wind blew from behind him. Then, a furry black claw stretched towards his head from behind. Shi Mu was taken aback. He turned around like a bolt of lightning. His right hand transformed into a translucent and sparkling fist at the same time. He then wielded his crystalline fist, it turned into a white light to deal with the black claw. However, the furry claw also turned into a fist, and bumped into Shi Mu's. Ping! A dull thumping sound was heard. Shi Mu's body shook. He was forced to take a step backwards due to the impact of the collision. However, this allowed him to see his opponent. It was a grey and giant ape-like monster. The fur around its mouth was smeared with blood. It seemed that it was the one who had sucked the leopard's blood. The grey monster had also been sent flying into the air when their fists had collided. But, it hadn't been injured. It rolled on the ground for a moment, and quickly got back to its feet. Its bloodshot eyes glowered at Shi Mu in a vicious manner. The trace of a bloodthirsty look could be seen in its bloodshot eyes. Chapter 130, The Story of Feng Li's Life. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's heart shook. He pulled out his black meteoric iron blade. Ah! The grey ape roared as he pounced at Shi Mu at an extremely fast speed. It was so fast that it almost turned into a grey shadow. And, it had reached extremely close to Shi Mu in a blink of an eye. Two furry claws moved forward to grab Shi Mu. One of them grabbed his waist, the other grabbed his throat. Suddenly, its nail turned flexible like a sickle's hook. It seemed that the ape had acquired an absolute control over the claw. A golden glow flashed in Shi Mu's eyes. Two shadows of the black blade emerged as he shook his wrist. Suddenly, a light flashed and chopped the claw shadow. Clang! The sound of clinging metals was heard. The sparks from the collision were scattered in all directions. It seemed as if the shadows of the black blade had struck an iron pillar. But, the grey ape's body wasn't greatly affected, it was just sent flying in the air. Shi Mu's complexion changed. The hairy claws of the grey ape seemed to be as hard as iron. And, the ape had surprisingly blocked the attack of the black blade with its bare hands. Shi Mu thought for a moment. He then jumped forward to catch up with the grey ape. 13 blade shadows flashed out of the black blade. The shadows got wrapped around the grey ape's body. It seemed that the ape was about to be chopped down into several pieces. However, the ape was shocked since the black blade suddenly changed its direction. The blade turned around, and struck the ape from the back. Bang! The grey ape was sent flying in the air like a dead leaf. It bumped against several huge trees, and collapsed on the ground upside down. The beast grimaced in pain. It crawled in an effort to get up. However, it was pushed to the ground as a foot forcefully pressed on its back. Shi Mu's complexion became cold as he looked down at the struggling grey ape. Then, his eyes fell upon the black blade. The weight of the black meteoric iron blade had greatly increased in the last 2 years. Now, it weighed around 320 kilograms. Therefore, it had been successful in defeating the grey ape. The black blade turned into black light as Shi Mu waved his arm. And, the light went past the grey ape's shoulder. A small part of the ape's fluffy grey hair was peeled off. It revealed a piece of blue clothing that hung on the corner of the ape's body. As expected, Shi Mu put down his other foot on grey ape's palm. He then started to peel off its grey hair. He noticed a black iron glove on its slightly exposed fingers. Suddenly, the grey ape stopped struggling, and yelled loudly. Then, its body started to tremble. Shi Mu was surprised. The trembling in the grey ape's body was getting more and more ferocious with each passing moment. Moreover, the long and grey hair on its body had started to shed one by one. And, the skin and the ragged clothes under the grey hair had started to get exposed. The sharp claws then fell off of the hands, and the claws changed into human hands. The grey ape gradually transformed into a human. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath. There was a dark red tattoo of a totem barbarian warrior on his back. It resembled an ape. And, it was wiggling like a living animal. A barbarian. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. He then poked the body with his foot and turned it over. He was suddenly rendered speechless. Feng Li. The ape on the ground was none other than Feng Li. The red color in his eyes was fading away at a very fast speed. And, his eyes were restoring their usual brightness. Suddenly, Shi Mu's pupil shrank. He moved his arm and placed his blade on Feng Li's neck. Feng Li's expressions changed. He had finally regained his consciousness. So, he couldn't help but move his body. Don't move. Otherwise, I'll not be concerned about what you have to say, Shi Mu pressed his arm down and said. Feng Li's heart bubbled with emotions. However, he felt as if a mountain had been placed on his shoulder. He felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on him. In fact, his shoulder bone had almost given away. Finally, he saw that it was Shi Mu who had stepped on him. His complexion turned pale. And, his expressions looked as if he had started to beg for forgiveness. "Brother Shi, please, have mercy on me." "Mercy?" Shi Mu's face became expressionless. He again pressed down his foot. "Ah!" Feng Li screamed loudly. "Brother Feng, I could have never imagined that you'd turn out to be a barbarian spy. Do you still have to say anything?" Shi Mu stated in a cold manner. He then leaned his black blade slightly. He only needed to move it a little, and it would cut Feng Li's throat. "Brother Shi, you must believe me. I swear. Please don't think that I'm a barbarian spy. If I was, then I would have certainly been more careful while hiding. I don't know how I got here at this time of the night, to do this kind of a thing." Feng Li gasped for breath. His throat felt the ice-cold metal of the blade against it. And, this stimulated his neck, so much so that he got goosebumps. Shi Mu's eyes flashed a thoughtful look as he heard this. However, his hand and the black blade remained motionless. "There is indeed a barbarian totem on my body. But, my body is different from ordinary humans. But, I can explain." Feng Li looked at Shi Mu. He then said hastily. "Well, I'll give you a chance. Tell me, who are you?" Shi Mu slightly wrinkled his brows. Then, he lifted the black blade. Feng Li's face revealed an expression of struggle. He started to speak slowly after a moment. "I'm a hybrid, half human and half barbarian. My mother was a human and my father was a barbarian." Shi Mu didn't look surprised. He had guessed something like that from what he had seen. Feng Li slowly narrated the story of his life. His mother was from the Dachi kingdom. She was taken as a prisoner by the barbarian tribe at the time of the first barbarian invasion. Then, she had become his father's slave. The humans didn't have any way out once they became captives of a barbarian tribe. Then, Feng Li's mother became pregnant, and it made her life even more difficult. She gave birth to a barbarian blood child Feng Li, but the mother and the child had been kept separated from everyone. However, the mother and the child finally found an opportunity to escape from the tribe as time passed. And, they underwent several hardships in order to return to the Dachi kingdom. However, his mother became depressed, and died several years ago. Feng Li narrated these experiences with a painful look on his face. And, a deep-rooted hatred would penetrate his eyes when he'd mentioned the barbarians. He didn't seem to be pretending. The coldness in Shi Mu's eyes had been greatly reduced by this time. He felt that he had some resemblance with Feng Li's background as he remembered the bitter experience of his own childhood. And, he realized that Feng Li's life had been far more miserable than his own. So, he couldn't help but take a pity on Feng Li. "So, you're half human. What were your intentions when you joined the Black Turtle sect?" Shi Mu asked in a heavy voice. "I needed strength. I had to become strong. These barbarians owe greatly to my mother. So, I wish revenge for her sake. A debt of blood, must be paid in blood." Feng Li's face became red in anger. He couldn't help growling. "Then, why did you lose your consciousness? Your body had such kind of a mutation." Shi Mu didn't express an opinion as he asked. "Brother Shi, you've just seen my totem. This was implanted on my body in a sacrificial offering in my clan when I was very young. The seal of the animal soul, I didn't know what it was back then. It didn't have any effect on me until a few years ago. But, it started to mutate 2 years ago. It erupts after every few months. Then, I reincarnate into an ape of a monster. It corrodes my sanity, and I become a bloodthirsty maniac. Then, I need to drink blood to calm myself down." Feng Li's face exposed a trace of suffering. He gnawed his teeth and said. Shi Mu looked at Feng Li in a calm manner. A thought flashed through his mind. Suddenly, he retrieved his foot and took down his black blade. Feng Li let out a sigh of relief. He then sat up and shot a nervous look at Shi Mu. Even if whatever you said is true, then how can I believe you? Shi Mu asked. Feng Li was startled. But then, his complexion changed. It seemed as if he had decided to do something. Suddenly, he stomped his foot. Then, his hand reached out to his neck and pulled out something. It appeared to be a strange kind of a necklace. He handed it over to Shi Mu and said, "This is a magic device that my mother gave me in her last days. She told me that this necklace had an important connection with me and the totem on my body. She asked me to take good care of this. Moreover, I'll sink into certain circumstances with no hope of survival if it gets damaged. I didn't think anything of it until 2 years ago. But I've taken good care of this thing, and I've worn it next to my skin ever since. It's as precious as life to me. I know that verbal statements aren't guaranteed. So, I wish to give the custody of this magic device to Brother Shi to prove my innocence." Shi Mu's heart moved as he heard these words. He received the necklace and carefully examined it. The necklace seemed to be made up of some kind of soft jade. It looked quite old from its appearance. There was a carved inscription on it of an ape-like terrible beast. Surprisingly, it was very similar to the totem on Feng Li's back. However, a layer of restriction was formed on its surface when Shi Mu tried to use his spirit power in order to invade into it. And, his divine knowledge reached it, and bounced back. His spirit power could only touch it for an instant. He could faintly feel that it contained the aura of a bloodthirsty and violent anger. It seemed as if it wanted to rush out of the restrictions. What startled Shi Mu even more was that Feng Li shouted loudly as soon as he touched the restrictions. He put his hands on the ground, and the flow of blood in his eyes increased. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with craziness once again. Shi Mu was astonished as he saw this. He then read the spell from the necklace, and Feng Li started to regain his original state. Feng Li had fully regained his consciousness by this time. But, he was gasping for breath. He forced a smile on his face, and crawled to stand up. "Well, Brother Feng has willingly handed over this thing to me. So, I'll trust you for the time being," Shi Mu thought for a while and said. He then raised his eyebrow, and put the black blade back into its sheath. "Thank you, Brother Shi." Feng Li bowed towards Shi Mu. "It's not needed. If you have any abnormalities later on, then I won't let you go. Besides, I've nothing to do with what you wish to do. I've no interest in it." Shi Mu looked at the full moon in the sky. His expression became tranquil. He then started to walk in the direction of the stronghold. Feng Li looked at the departing figure of Shi Mu, and let out a long breath. He then started to follow after him. 3 months went by in a flash. The battle between human and the barbarian race was still in a deadlock. The battles continued to erupt between the two sides from time to time. And, there were mutual victories and defeats. However, the rat's nest remained unaffected since it was in the rear. But, the demand for paper charms was increasing day by day. The days passed by in tranquility. Shi Mu's pain was greatly reduced during the blood and marrow cleansing process since he had come to practice the soul comforting spell. So, he wanted to practice it the 5th time with the help of the art of breeding a strong evil ape. Shi Mu's body had already reached an inconceivable stage by this time. The art of breeding a strong evil ape had turned out to be stronger than before. And, it had promoted his strength to over double its previous level. Now, his strikes weighed around 2,000 to 3,000 kilograms. Therefore, Shi Mu could easily twist and fold an iron rod. In fact, he could even split several feet wide giant stones without the help of the stone-breaking fist. The tenacity of his body was far superior to what it had earlier been. Moreover, ordinary swords or spears couldn't harm him if they weren't used under the influence of one's real qi. However, Shi Mu needed more demon qi and tempering pills every time he practiced the art of breeding a strong evil ape. The yin qi had also accumulated significantly in his body, it couldn't be underestimated. Shi Mu was overjoyed. However, he needed more essence of the blood of apes and monkeys to cultivate his arts further. So, he had to suspend his practice for the time being. Shi Mu felt gratified due to his high cultivation. However, he didn't know that a disaster was approaching him at a fast pace.